Chapter 347. For the next few days, Han Shuo stayed deep underground, collecting the magic crystal ores with the help of ancient lizard king Degasi. Only when Han Shuo's space ring could no longer hold any more magic crystal ores did he emerge from the ruins of Gourd Mountain. Han Shuo's harvest from this trip to the underground world was bountiful. Not only had he killed Kelt, but he had also gained the friendship of the lizard men. Han Shuo's space ring was also completely filled with spoils of war. During this trip to the underground world, Han Shuo had taken all the spoils of the Redbud Knights as his own, as well as Kelt's many years of savings, including several pieces of Dark Elf Arlen's magic equipment. His total harvest this time, if converted to gold coins, was at least 2 million. Alright, I'll leave the underground world first. I'll come back next time to collect the remaining magic crystal ores. The next time I come, I'll bring more weapons for you to use to resist the Dark Elves' invasion. Han Shuo said to the lizardmen leader. The next time you come, I won't be in the underground world. I hope we'll meet again, and I hope you can take care of them for me. Ancient Lizard King Degasi looked at Han Shuo, who was preparing to leave. Don't worry, I'll help you take care of them, Han Shuo solemnly promised. In these past few days, Degasi had told Han Shuo many things that Han Shuo was interested in. He was just like a benevolent old man. Unknowingly, Han Shuo had developed a favorable impression of Degasi. Now, he was a little reluctant to leave. From Degasi's words, Han Shuo knew that his departure this time wasn't as simple as leaving the underground world. He seemed to be planning on leaving the profound continent. Degasi was a little vague about these deeper secrets and didn't explain too much to Han Shuo. Han Shuo couldn't understand the thoughts of a demigod like Degasi, nor did he pursue the matter. Han Shuo only vaguely understood that Degasi's enemies were probably just as powerful. Han Shuo's performance in parting with Degasi was carefree and unruffled. After leaving this area, Han Shuo didn't continue to stay in the underground world. Relying on his amazing memory, he followed the original path to the surface world. Han Shuo didn't encounter anything special along the way. Occasionally, he would encounter some races that tried to rob Han Shuo, but they were all killed by Han Shuo with lightning speed. He easily returned to the dark forest. After staying in the underground world for more than 10 days, Han Shuo felt a sense of satisfaction when he suddenly saw the sun hanging high above his head. The warm sunlight shone down, making Han Shuo feel extremely comfortable. The lush vegetation of the dark forest was mixed with a few exotic flowers and rare herbs. They overflowed with a delicate fragrance that refreshed the heart and refreshed the mind in this warm spring. Feeling the warmth and comfort that was different from the dark and damp underground world, Han Shuo headed straight for the Cemetery of Death. After returning to the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo didn't linger and directly returned to the City Lord's mansion in Bretel City. Having reaped a bountiful harvest, Han Shuo immediately called for a small meeting, summoning little Fatty Jack, Dorcas, Falk, Chester, and the others to come see him. You've been gone for more than 10 days. Where have you been? Jack was the closest to Han Shuo, directly asking as soon as he arrived. Hee, I made a trip to the Dark Forest. Oh right, has Bretel City been stable lately? Han Shuo smiled faintly. He didn't conceal his trip to the Dark Forest this time, only that he didn't reveal the existence of the Cemetery of Death. Although the Redbud Knights and the Dark Elves of the underground world had suffered heavy losses, a small portion of the Redbud Knights had still managed to escape. These people should also know of Han Shuo's identity. His actions in the underground world this time must have been known beforehand. Dick, the person in charge of the Dark Mantle here, bowed respectfully to Han Shuo and said, My lord, I have some information to report to you in a moment. We're all on the same side. There's no need to hide anything. Speak directly. Han Shuo knew that Dick must have received some information from above. Jack, Dorcas, Falk, and Chester were all people Han Shuo could trust. Although Falk had been sent here by Lawrence, Lawrence should have also mentioned Han Shuo's identity as a member of the Dark Mantle to Han Shuo. Therefore, Han Shuo didn't need him to avoid suspicion. Jack and Dorcas had interacted with Dick for a long time these days, and more or less knew some of Dick's background. The existence of the Dark Mantle wasn't a secret in the Lancelot Empire. Although many people wouldn't openly discuss it, they still had a general idea in their hearts. Lord Candide has sent a message expressing high praise for your actions in the underground world. The Dark Forest is the border of our Lancelot Empire. Although the Brute Merchant Alliance will be extremely indignant at the heavy losses suffered by the Redbud Knights, they won't take any drastic actions. Lord Candide wants you to be at ease. Seeing that Han Shuo didn't have any misgivings, Dick directly reported. Nodding his head, Han Shuo smiled and said, "Continue." Dorcas, Jack, and Falk were completely baffled by Dick's words. They didn't understand what Dick was talking about, but Falk and Dorcas had heard of Candide, one of the three heavyweights of the Dark Mantle. From Dick's words, the two knew that Han Shuo and Candide's relationship wasn't shallow. They were both astonished. Lord Candide said that your contributions this time were very great. With His Majesty's approval, from now on you will be the second Dark Sun Envoy. As long as you visit the Dark Mantle headquarters next time, we can change your position on the badge. Congratulations, Lord. Dick's face was full of worship. He himself was the first to become excited. A second Dark Sun Envoy, hee. It looks like Cecilia didn't hide my contributions. This woman can be considered to have some connections. Han Shuo was also in a good mood as he muttered to himself with a smile. From Star Envoy to Moon Envoy was one rank. From Moon Envoy to Sun Envoy was another. From Sun Envoy to Star Envoy, each rank was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Becoming a second Dark Sun Envoy meant that from this moment on, Han Shuo had taken another step forward in the Dark Mantle. The special treatment he could enjoy was also a level higher. He could even recruit his own subordinates and control an area. My lord, a second Dark Sun Envoy has the right to appoint Star Envoys on missions. He also has the right to directly give Star Envoys merits and raise their status. Chester excitedly looked at Han Shuo and reminded him, "Don't worry, I naturally won't forget your benefits after becoming a second Dark Sun Envoy." Han Shuo laughed heartily as he said to Chester. He then looked at Dick with a smile and said, "Apart from this, did the higher-ups say anything else?" Lord Candide said that you don't need to worry about other things. He will be responsible for helping you deal with those unfavorable comments. My lord only needs to take care of the matters in Brettel City. Dick hesitated for a moment before replying. Nodding his head, Han Shuo expressed that he understood. He was clear that Cecilia had truthfully reported the situation this time. She'd naturally also told him about how he'd intercepted Cecilia's forest troll operation. All right, I understand. Han Shuo looked at Dorcas and Falk and asked, "What's the situation in Brettel City recently? Have the mountain people all come down from the mountains? Has the 7 Grand Duchies taken any action against Brettel City?" A total of 20,000 mountain people have come down from the mountains and are currently living in Brettel City. The 5 mountain leaders have actively cooperated with us, allowing the operation to go very smoothly this time. The 7 Grand Duchies have slowly calmed down during this time. Only Helentina of Helen Duchy is still annihilating the rebels in her duchy. However, she's also nearing the end of it. Dorcas replied. Ever since Dorcas had entered the army, he'd gradually replaced Falk's position through his own efforts and Han Shuo's meticulous arrangements. Dorcas was a pure soldier and didn't conceal his ambition for battle. Due to all the formal military education he'd received for so many years, he was much better at leading troops than Falk, who'd been born a knight. Falk also understood in his heart that Dorcas was indeed more skilled in this aspect. Add to that the fact that Dorcas had gained Han Shuo's deep trust. There was nothing he could do about this gradual change in authority. Fortunately, Han Shuo didn't mistreat him. He'd formed a troop of 1,000 knights consisting of Falk's trusted aides and the strongest soldiers of Brettel City. Han Shuo had built this troop of 1,000 knights according to the most luxurious equipment. Their armor, weapons, and accessories were all the most expensive in all of Brettel City. Han Shuo had invested a lot into this troop of knights, using the best materials that could be purchased from the market. Han Shuo had already invested 300,000 gold coins. Apart from the lack of war horses, this troop of knights wasn't inferior to the regular knights of the Empire in terms of equipment. Of course, compared to the top 10 knight regiments of the Profound Continent, this troop of knights was still far inferior in terms of both combat power and equipment. However, in the current Brettel City and even the 7 Grand Duchies, This newly formed troop of knights couldn't be underestimated. As a pure knight, there was nothing more tempting than having control over such a regular troop of knights. Therefore, Falk didn't express too much displeasure at the loss of military authority. Instead, he poured all of his enthusiasm into training this troop of knights. It seems that the 7 Grand Duchies won't have the energy to make a move against us for the time being, Han Shuo said with a smile. Dorcas nodded and said with certainty, right now, it looks like the 7 Grand Duchies won't make a move for at least a month. However, if the 7 Grand Duchies do make a move against us this time, it definitely won't be a single one. News of the disastrous losses suffered by the 4 bandit bands has already spread throughout the 7 Grand Duchies. Although the combined strength of every single one of the duchies isn't something the 4 bandit bands can compare to, I think that with this example, they won't dare to act blindly without full confidence. After a pause, Dorcas continued, in other words, either the 7 Grand Duchies don't make a move, or if they do, I'm afraid it'll be another fierce battle for Brettel City. Humph, the 7 Grand Duchies have always treated Brettel City as their hunting ground. I think they need to change this concept. Only by killing every time they come will they remember. Han Shuo said with a cold expression. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said to Dorcas and Falk, take advantage of the fact that Brettel City is still relatively safe during this period of time to train your soldiers. Our targets are the bandit bands that have invaded Brettel City in the past few years. I know that apart from the 4 bandit bands, there are also 7 or 8 bandit bands of various sizes that have attacked Brettel City. Think of a way to make them spit out everything they've plundered. He took out Kelt's space ring and took out the armor of the Redbud Knights as well as a large amount of magic crystal ore. He said to Jack, this space ring contains the armor of the Redbud Knights, as well as a large amount of magic crystal ore. When you put the goods into the warehouse later, leave this space ring behind. This space ring, is it for me? Jack was pleasantly surprised as he looked at the space ring Han Shuo handed over, his voice a little high. Yes, this space ring originally belonged to Kelt, the commander of the Redbud Knights. The space inside is enough for you to store items. Han Shuo said to Jack with a smile. He then handed over Fire Mage Marceau's space ring to Jack, saying, there are some crystals and various jewels inside, as well as nearly 1 million gold coins. All of them will be used as Brettel City's operating funds. I'll leave them in your hands. Jack took Kelt's space ring and sensed the large amount of magic crystal ore and armor stored inside. He smiled at the excited Falk, saying, Falk, now you have even better armor to use. The magic crystal ore inside is enough for our magic crystal cannons to use for a while. That's great. The City Lord's trip was really fruitful. Falk exclaimed with joy when he heard Jack's words. Kelt and Marceau's space rings were filled with the magic crystal ore they'd excavated this time, as well as the armor that the dead Redbud Knights had stripped off, as well as the crystals, jade, and gold that Kelt had collected from the underground world. As for the magical equipment and the divine weapon Starry Sky, as well as the tent with the magical space, they'd all been stored in Han Shuo's space ring ahead of time. All that was given to Jack were gold coins and items that could be sold for gold coins that didn't have much practical value to Han Shuo. For Han Shuo, Brettel City was his most important capital. How to make Brettel City stronger was his true concern. These gold coins would definitely be put to good use in Jack's hands. All right, it's up to you guys how to use these things, Han Shuo said to Jack and the others. He knew that Brettel City would become even more powerful with these things. Chapter 348. After 5 days, Fabian and a group of merchants once again arrived at Brettel City. The supplies they'd brought this time were far greater than the last time. The enthusiasm of the merchants who tasted the sweetness was beyond Han Shuo's expectations. This time, each merchant brought a caravan. 2 earth dragons even appeared to pull the carriages. The earth dragons had bags of various sizes on their bodies, filled with goblin bombs and bags of crossbow bolts. The supplies on the carriages at the back were covered tightly with gray canvas. However, judging from the high-arched shape of the carriages, one could tell that they were war chariots with astonishing firepower. The carriages pulled by the 2 slow-moving earth dragons were 5 meters wide and a dozen meters long. Such a wide carriage could hold 10 war chariots or catapults. There were at least 20 war chariots pulled by the 2 earth dragons, and 27 smaller carriages pulled by warhorses. Although these 27 carriages weren't as large as the 2 earth dragons, each one could still hold 3 war chariots. Further back were the cloud mover beasts, which had the same ability to carry heavy loads as the earth dragons, but moved slowly. These cloud mover beasts were twice the size of warhorses, and their 4 long legs were as thick as elephants. They carried bags of food and daily necessities on their backs, which should be enough to replenish Brettel City's stockpiles. Compared to the last time, the number of merchants had doubled. Each of them was beaming with joy. Their expressions relaxed as they discussed the rewards they'd receive along the way. There were no more corpses on the road from Seamus City to Brettel City, nor were there any traces of bandits. Under Dorcas's sweep, all the disobedient bandits in the area were eradicated. The remaining obedient bandits were tamed and turned into diligent cleaners who cleaned up the rotting corpses. These minute discoveries gradually put the new merchants at ease. When they arrived at Brettel City, Jack, as the financial officer of Brettel City, finished counting every batch of supplies and handed over the gold coins to the merchants on the spot. The merchants who'd traveled thousands of miles were in a good mood after receiving their rewards. They weren't in a hurry to leave Brettel City. Instead, they began to tangle with Jack in an attempt to open a shop in Brettel City. Jack, the Buzzed Merchant Guild also plans on establishing a branch in the city. Arrange a suitable location for us, Fabian said to Jack. Understood. The Buzzed Merchant Guild branch will definitely be arranged first. Jack happily agreed, ignoring the dissatisfaction of the surrounding merchants. He pulled Fabian to the side and said sneakily, "Have these people really thought it through and decided to set up shop in Brettel City?" Yes. After the defeat of the 4 bandit groups, Brettel City has become a good place for merchants to find treasures under our deliberate promotion. To be honest, the mines around Brettel City were rich in minerals. As long as they had enough craftsmen, Brettel City could use these ores to create weapons. Brettel City was the pass closest to the 7 Grand Duchies. To the 7 Grand Duchies, Lancelot's luxurious clothes, porcelain, and other luxuries were something the nobles of the 7 Grand Duchies would gladly spend large amounts of money to purchase. The valiant warhorses, furs, and gems produced by the 7 Grand Duchies were something the Lancelot Empire needed. If it wasn't for the fact that Brettel City's safety couldn't be guaranteed, a city with such an excellent location like this would have long since become a place where merchants would fight to make a fortune. Now that we've released the news of Brettel City's great victory over the 4 bandit groups and the removal of the obstacles on the road, many guilds working with the Buzzed Merchant Guild have taken the initiative to come over. This is only the first batch. Just wait and see. As long as Brettel City's safety can truly be assured, more and more merchants chasing huge profits will definitely swarm into Brettel City. At that time, Brettel City would be extremely lively even if it didn't want to. Fabian explained to Jack. It looks like my choice was indeed wise. After hearing Fabian's words, little fatty Jack's chubby face was smiling so widely that even his little eyes were almost invisible. Little fatty Jack then said to Fabian, "Do you know how many valuable things Brian brought back from his trip to the underground world this time?" "Haha, uncle. I now have more than 2 million gold coins in my hands that I can use. If I include the crystals, gold, silver, and jewelry, the wealth I hold in my hands is more than 3 million gold coins. I've never dared to believe that I could hold such a large sum of money before." Fabian was obviously taken aback by Jack's words. He then sighed and said, "You brat, follow Brian well? The fact that he's given you such a large sum of money is enough to prove his trust in you. Based on this situation, as long as you continue to work hard in Brettel City, becoming a noble in the future won't be difficult at all." "Don't worry, uncle. I know what to do. Those crystals, gold, silver, and jewelry still need to be sold through merchant guilds. As long as there's enough gold coins, Brettel City will become an impenetrable fortress." Jack replied, "There are ready-made merchants here. I think they'll definitely be interested in the things you have in your hands. You can directly trade with them." Fabian laughed heartily and said, "I still have to go see Brian. Miss Phoebe asked me to bring some things to him." "Go. He's waiting for you," Jack replied. After leaving Jack's place, Fabian found Han Shua's room. Han Shuo had been waiting for a long time when he knew that Fabian was coming. When he heard Fabian's footsteps, Han Shuo welcomed him in and said with a smile, "Mr. Fabian, did Phoebe ask you to bring me anything?" "Of course. The things you need are inside this space ring." Fabian replied with a smile and handed a space ring to Han Shuo. Han Shuo held the space ring and scanned it with his mental strength. He immediately smiled. "Give this sword to Phoebe for me. You must be careful. Don't let anything go wrong along the way." Taking out the divine weapon, Starry Sky, Han Shuo cautiously handed it to Fabian. He reminded him again, "This is the divine weapon, Starry Sky, in the hands of Kelt, commander of the Redbud Knights. You should be able to imagine its value." Fabian's expression immediately turned grave when he heard Han Shuo's words. He stored the divine weapon, Starry Sky, into his own space ring and said, "Don't worry, I will definitely deliver it to Miss Phoebe. Have Phoebe continue to collect the items on this list for me." Han Shuo took out another list and handed it to Fabian. "All right, I know what to do." Fabian put away the list and continued to promise. After Fabian left, Han Shuo found Chester and gave him a few instructions before returning to the Cemetery of Death. The Cemetery of Death was filled with a deathly aura all year round. Amidst the pure white bones, there was now a huge, oval-shaped crypt. This crypt was surrounded by 12 multicolored banners. Each of the banners was about 10 meters tall and fluttered in the windless Cemetery of Death. Strange symbols were drawn on each of the banners. The enormous oval-shaped crypt was filled with sharp bone spikes. A portion of these spikes had been plucked from the dead green dragon by Han Shuo, while the other portion had been obtained from the forbidden area last time. All of them were the bones of dead super-rank magical creatures. Han Shuo poured bucket after bucket of black and purplish liquid into the enormous oval-shaped crypt. When all of the black and purplish liquid had been poured into the crypt, Han Shuo took out even more buckets of liquid from his space ring and poured them all into the crypt. These liquids were either stinking blood or filthy juices. They came in all sorts of colors and smelled terrible. After a few dozen buckets of all kinds of liquids had been poured into the crypt, Han Shuo took out a dagger and cut open his wrist. Drops of fresh blood dripped down. As soon as Han Shuo's blood dripped into the liquid, faint red smoke suddenly appeared. The drops of Han Shuo's blood didn't immediately dissolve into the liquid, but instead began to churn like red agates. The calm liquid crackled like a pot of boiling oil as Han Shuo's blood continuously dripped down. Han Shuo raised his head to the sky and howled. The howl was filled with sinister killing intent, like a dragon's roar. The demon's lair edge shot out from the back of Han Shuo's neck. Souls with contorted faces and silent wails poured into the 12 banners like snakes. After nearly 100 souls entered the banners suddenly exploded with killing intent that soared to the heavens. When the killing intent floated out of the banners, it seemed to be attracted by the liquid in the crypt and floated to the surface of the liquid at a speed visible to the naked eye. Han Shuo's blood that had been unable to dissolve gradually dissolved into the liquid in the crypt, disappearing without a trace after a while. Taking a deep breath, Han Shuo circulated his magical yuan to the wound on his wrist. Under Han Shuo's watchful gaze, the wound that had been cut by the dagger quickly healed. Taking out the skeletal staff, Han Shuo quickly chanted an incantation. 3 evil knights suddenly appeared in front of Han Shuo. When the 3 evil knights appeared, Han Shuo pointed the skeletal staff in his hand at the crypt. The 3 evil knights, guided by the power of the contract, walked into the crypt one after another. When the first evil knight and his warhorse entered the crypt, the evil knight and his warhorse suddenly roared soundlessly in unison. Both the evil knight and warhorse howled to the sky. When the dark brown armor and warhorse came into contact with the liquid in the crypt, popping sounds immediately rang out. Puffs of light smoke rose from where their bodies were connected to the liquid. The evil knight and his warhorse seemed to be enduring endless pain. The evil knight, who had never dared to resist, suddenly tried to break free from the power of the contract. His body writhed violently, wanting to leave the crypt that was causing him unbearable pain. Unlike low-level existences, such as the skeleton warriors, the evil knights possessed extremely powerful combat abilities and were considered to have true wisdom in the undead dimension. Although their powerful strength was bound by the power of the contract, they still instinctively wanted to struggle when this kind of torture, which was even more painful than being completely dissipated, occurred. Han Shuo gripped the skeletal staff and cursed in a low voice. How can you be reborn from the ashes without experiencing inhumane pain and torture? You ungrateful thing. You'll only understand what the pain you're experiencing right now when your body becomes stronger after you've been tempered. Just the materials for this 12 demon-breeding soul-crushing formation will cost at least 100,000 gold coins. Don't struggle ungratefully. As Han Shuo cursed in a low voice, he used his mental strength to suppress the evil knight's resistance. He also used his mental strength to force the other two evil knights into the crypt. Like the first evil knight, the other two evil knights who had been forced into the core of the 12 demon-breeding soul-crushing formation by Han Shuo's mental strength also began to resist amidst the unbearable pain. They tried to break free from the power of the contract that Han Shuo had placed on them. Han Shuo could easily deal with one evil knight, but when the three evil knights and their fire-breathing warhorses resisted together, even Han Shuo found it difficult to deal with them. He had no choice but to use all of his mental strength to suppress the impact of the three evil knights and their mounts on the power of the contract. 9 demon-breeding revolutions, soul-crushing return, eliminate. As he used his mental strength to suppress the three evil knights, Han Shuo also had to divert his attention to control the Great Formation. After he said this, the killing intent on the 12 banners grew even thicker. The banners had been painted with runes, but after the power of evil spirits poured into them, 12 sinister and frightening ghost faces slowly appeared. Although each ghost face had a different shape, they were all equally frightening. These 12 sinister and frightening ghost faces were exactly the same as the 12 demon heads that had entered Han Shuo's body when he had first advanced to the separate demon realm. When the 12 sinister ghost faces appeared on the banners, the 12 demon heads slowly flowed out of Han Shuo's body and occupied the respective banners. When the 12 demon heads returned to the banners from Han Shuo's body, the killing intent on the banners suddenly gathered at the center of the crypt. The three evil knights and their mounts felt as if their soul imprints had been set ablaze. Their soundless roars became even more ferocious as they frantically attacked the power of the contract with their minds. Han Shuo immediately stopped moving and put away the skeletal staff. He closed his eyes and sat down in front of the crypt where the three evil knights were. He used all of his mental strength to suppress the three evil knights. The three evil knights brandished the huge bone spurs in their hands and danced above the evil knight's head. It seemed as if they could behead Han Shuo at any time. Chapter 349. The 12 banners fluttered in the windless air as the murderous aura condensed into mercury and flowed into the cave in the center. The liquid within the cave boiled like boiling kerosene, burning the three evil knights and their mounts until thick smoke billowed out. Han Shuo sat cross-legged in front of the three evil knights with his eyes closed. His mental strength was like a mountain torrent that had broken through a dam, firmly suppressing the three evil knights based on the power of the contract. Due to their weaker mounts, they gradually stopped struggling in vain. The three enormous bone spurs continuously spun in front of Han Shuo. As long as Han Shuo relaxed his mental strength, the evil knights would seize the opportunity to stab their spurs into Han Shuo's head. Han Shuo's attention was completely focused, and he didn't relax in the slightest. Tens of thousands of strands of mental strength crisscrossed to form an invisible net that slowly ground down the three evil knights' resistance. There was no sun or moon in the cemetery of death, and it was shrouded in dim light all year round. Thus, there was no concept of time. After an unknown amount of time, the three bone spurs flying above Han Shuo's head gradually lost their power and slowly fell into the cave in the center, just like the evil knights' bodies. Han Shuo's entire body was like a deathly still statue as he sat there cross-legged without any signs of life. The 12 banners continued to swallow and spit out ferocious murderous aura, all of it converging towards the cave in the center. After a few more days, the three evil knights' bodies had completely melded into the cave, and no traces of them could be seen anymore. Finally, Han Shua exhaled lightly and slowly opened his eyes, saying tiredly, "So damn tired." Just the three evil knights and their mounts had caused Han Shua a great deal of trouble during this process of body tempering. It seemed that it was just as Han Shua had thought, that magical arts couldn't reconstruct the bodies of all undead creatures. On one hand, the materials needed to refine the body were too complex and precious. If thousands of skeletal and zombie warriors were to be refined one by one, even with Han Shua's small savings, he wouldn't be able to handle it. Just the three evil knights tempering cost at least 100,000 gold coins. If thousands of skeletal and zombie warriors were to be refined one by one, Han Shua wouldn't be able to accomplish it even if he went bankrupt. On the other hand, it would take too much time and energy for too many undead creatures to do the same thing over and over again. The effect of this huge project was also very limited. After all, the skeletal warriors and zombie warriors were low-level existences. Even if they weren't afraid of the light magic's holy light corrosion, there was a limit to what they could do. Naturally, Han Shua wasn't willing to waste time and large amounts of gold coins on them. Evil knights were currently the strongest undead creatures that Han Shua could summon. Evil knights were already of a very high level among undead creatures, and they could use their fire-breathing warhorses to gain great mobility. In addition, their strength was astonishing, and their armor was sufficiently sturdy. An evil knight was a bit more difficult to deal with than an average human earth knight. Even with the three evil knights and their mounts resisting with all their might, Han Shua had to use his mental strength to suppress their resistance. When Han Shua could truly summon the Bone Demon and Old Fei Fei, he definitely wouldn't be able to refine three of them at once. This was because the Bone Demon and Old Fei Fei would definitely resist even more fiercely. Standing up from his cross-legged position, Han Shua's thoughts moved, and the 12 demon generals entrenched in the huge banner whizzed back into Han Shua's body. Since the bodies of the three evil knights had all sunk into the crypt, there was no need for Han Shua to use his own demonic yuan to suppress the great formation. The 12 demon generals were formed when Han Shua first reached the separate demon realm, using the enormous killing intent that lingered around Tanai under the glorious sun. These 12 demon generals carried an intense killing intent, and each one was formed from the last bit of ferocious obsession of numerous malicious spirits. They were the best materials to refine the mystical demons, which were a level higher than the Een demons. Of the three Een demons that had been refined last time, only one was left that could be used. Han Shua deeply felt that one Een demon was indeed not enough to control the entire situation. Back when he had advanced to the separate demon realm in the Valley of Sunshine, Han Shua had deliberately kept the soaring killing intent to condense into 12 demon generals. He was waiting for the materials to refine the mystical demons to be gathered, and then he would use the 12 demon generals as the basic materials to refine them into mystical demons. Leaving this area that was already operating on its own, Han Shua arrived at the area that specialized in refining original demons and Een demons. Summoning the Earth Elite Zombie, he first changed the Een Demon Cave's layout, causing the Een Demon Cave to gradually transform into a mystical demon cave for cultivating mystical demons. When the mystical demon cave had taken shape, Han Shua took out materials one by one and placed them into each of the formation eyes of the mystical demon cave. When all this was done, Han Shua sent the Earth Elite Zombie away and threw in 12 drops of his own blood essence into the mystical demon cave. The blood essence floated in the mystical demon cave, spinning non-stop. When the 12 demon generals came out of Han Shua's body, they each swallowed a drop of blood essence. Soon after, the mystical demon cave's enormous power began to circulate. Han Shua once again summoned a few hundred wraiths, and also extracted some souls from the demon's lair edge and threw them into the mystical demon cave, as fodder for the 12 mystical demons' evolution. Han Shua himself poured all the remaining demonic yuan in his body into the mystical demon cave, in order to maintain the mystical demon cave's normal operation. When the 12 demon generals in the mystical demon cave began to howl and swallow the wraiths and the malicious souls within the demon's lair edge, the exhausted Han Shua returned to the cemetery of death. Maintaining the two formations' normal operation, not only did Han Shua expend an enormous amount of mental strength, He had also invested a lot of demonic yuan and blood essence. This was even more tiring than when he'd fought against Kas and the others in Bredel City. Last time, he had the Little Skull, the Earth Elite Zombie, and the Fire Elite Zombie to help him. However, he could only do such a major task himself, so he was indeed very tired. Sitting down in the main hall of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shuo pondered for a moment, then took out the skeletal staff. He carefully stared at the tricolored skeletal staff and began to study it. He wanted to take advantage of this time to investigate the secrets within the skeletal staff. The Calamity Church's Grand Magus Necromancer Wolf and the ancient Lizard King Degasi seemed to know a little about the skeletal staff's origins. This skeletal staff that had been transformed from the Eye of Darkness was the key to opening the Cemetery of Death. It definitely contained many secrets. Han Shuo hadn't been in possession of the skeletal staff for a long time. His understanding of the skeletal staff was only to increase his necromancy magic. If it wasn't for the fact that Grand Magus Necromancer Wolf had once used the skeletal staff's power to rejuvenate his youth, Han Shuo would never have guessed that the skeletal staff had such a miraculous effect. Skeletal staff, oh skeletal staff, just how many secrets are you hiding? Han Shuo muttered to himself as he caressed the tricolored skull in his hand. The exhausted Han Shuo was in a trance. In his daze, he seemed to sense that he was enveloped by the tricolored light of the skeletal staff. In his daze, Han Shuo seemed to be spinning continuously. The multicolored light rapidly passed in front of him and behind him. This feeling was as if Han Shuo was falling from an extremely high place, falling into an endless abyss. Just as Han Shuo was feeling extremely dizzy and uncomfortable, he suddenly sensed a familiar aura in his consciousness. That aura seemed to be in a certain area of the endless abyss that he had fallen into. Following the connection to that familiar aura, the muddle-headed Han Shuo's consciousness tightly wrapped around that familiar aura and gradually sank into it. Asterisk, 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 the endless black void in the distance was forever shrouded in turbid gray. Clusters of gray and black clouds constantly rolled. The entire area was filled with a sense of desolation and desolation. The places closer to him were all swamps or tree trunks without branches and leaves. On the barren land, there were all kinds of undead creatures walking with stiff footsteps and bodies, aimlessly wandering in the eternally silent space. There was no rotation of the sun, moon, and stars here, and there was no concept of time. There was only loneliness, despair, and desolation. For a moment, Han Shuo thought that he was in the Cemetery of Death, because the sky here was very similar to the dusk that shrouded the Cemetery of Death all year round. However, when the soaring bodies of gargoyles whizzed past above his head, and the chaotic aura of death converged with the skeletons and zombies underground, Han Shuo suddenly realized that he was definitely not in the Cemetery of Death. He clearly remembered that he did not summon these low-level undead creatures in the Cemetery of Death. In the next moment, Han Shuo suddenly felt that he was in a dream. When he thought about it, he realized that he indeed did not have a body, and only his pure consciousness was here. However, when Han Shuo tried to think about his own body, his exhausted mental strength gradually shrouded his consciousness. From head to toe, Han Shuo's body was growing rapidly like a plant. His left hand touched his right hand, and the two hands obviously touched, but Han Shuo did not feel any skin touching. Everything seemed so strange, but Han Shuo felt a sense of familiarity with everything around him. As for where the familiarity was, Han Shuo could not feel it. A dense horde of undead creatures suddenly rushed down from a towering bald mountain. These undead creatures were neatly arranged in groups, with skeletal warriors and zombie warriors at the front, followed by skeletal archers and rows of gargoyles. Further back were two evil knights. There were actually 3,000 to 4,000 of these undead creatures, but most of them were skeletal warriors, zombie warriors, and ghouls. A small portion of hate warriors and evil knights rushed down from the towering bald mountain and directly surged towards a steep gorge called Tanai. Han Shuo's body and consciousness slowly drifted into the canyon. Upon arriving, Han Shuo discovered that there was also a sea of undead creatures in the canyon. The large number of undead creatures were fighting each other, using their bodies, claws, and teeth to wrestle and tear at each other. They didn't know pain, nor did they know how to retreat. The scene was extremely magnificent. Once weak undead creatures were completely destroyed. Low-level existences like skeletal warriors and zombie warriors would have their soul power immediately dissipate. However, from the higher-level hate warriors onwards, their soul power would not immediately dissipate once they were destroyed. At this time, the surrounding undead creatures would fight over their soul power and devour it to strengthen themselves. As the undead creatures crazily slaughtered each other, a 5-meter-tall mummy lord slowly stood up from the depths of the gorge. Its entire body was wrapped in white, corrosive cloth. This mummy lord seemed to be the leader of the undead creatures in Tanai. When it stood up from the depths of the gorge, an incomparably enormous storm of death erupted from its body. The undead creatures that had rushed down from the bald mountain were all turned to dust when the storm of death swept past them. The white cloth wrapped around the mummy lord's body danced like a sharp weapon, and all of the hostile undead creatures in its path were torn apart. Only an evil knight that had come down brandished his bone spear to block the attack, spurring his fire-breathing warhorse to retreat. The mummy lord's rank was higher than that of an evil knight's amongst the undead creatures. The difference of one rank in a battle between undead creatures meant that there was no suspense. Unless 10 evil knights attacked the mummy lord at the same time, an evil knight facing the mummy lord alone would always be a dead end. After the mummy lord appeared from the depths of the gorge, the surrounding undead creatures that had rushed down from the bald mountain were all killed by its storm of death. In a short period of time, more than 700 undead creatures had been turned to dust. Existence that occupies the high mountain, except the challenge of the mummy lord Faluri. That lofty mountain is not a height that the weak you can withstand. Give me that territory. An enormous mental strength swept through the entire area as the mummy lord Faluri roared at the lofty mountain. How can the dignity of my lord be violated by a lowly mummy? The evil knight that had retreated calmly on his fire-breathing warhorse roared. Following his roar, the sound of rolling mountain rocks suddenly came from the surroundings of the gorge. The wood and fire elite zombies that Han Shuo was incomparably familiar with rode on fire-breathing warhorses, galloping over from both sides of the gorge. An enormous shadow swooped down from the top of the towering bald mountain. It was a peculiar undead creature with spikes all over its body. The little skeleton's bone blade had at some point transformed into a 3-meter-long bone spear, with 7 bone spikes sticking out of its back in a ferocious upside-down manner. As the little skull descended on the enormous undead creature, a solemn and dignified aura enveloped the entire area. Lowly mummy lord, my territory is not something you can touch. Not only will your soul be destroyed today, but the northern mummy territory will also be under my control from now on. The little skull's thoughts exploded like a mountain torrent, completely disproportionate to his tiny body. My lord's dignity will command the darkness. The evil knight that had previously answered flew down from his fire-breathing warhorse and kowtowed towards the little skull swooping down, his face solemn and devout. It was the first time Mummy Lord Pharaoh had seen this legendary variant skeleton. The power that erupted from the little skeleton's body instantly made Pharaoh feel fear. There was also the fire elite zombie, whose entire body was covered in flames, and the warhorse beneath him had almost turned into 2 fireballs. The scorching heat caused Pharaoh, who was fond of the cold, to feel extremely uncomfortable. Suddenly, Pharaoh felt as if he had fallen into a trap this time. The Mummy Lord Pharaoh had lived in this world for countless years. He was different from the other muddle-headed undead creatures. He had long since possessed true intelligence. Pharaoh, who had emerged from the depths of the earth, felt that something was amiss. He tried to return to the depths of the earth, but at this moment, the soft earth suddenly became as hard as iron and stone. While the Mummy Lord Pharaoh was panicking, the simple-minded Earth elite zombie slowly floated up from the earth. He grinned at Pharaoh and said naively, "You can't run away now, right?" The previously awe-inspiring Mummy Lord Pharaoh suddenly realized that there was no way out. He angrily howled, "Despicable existence! You are too treacherous!" The little skull didn't pay attention to him. The soaring undead creature beneath him suddenly charged towards the mummy Lord Pharaoh. It raised its 3-meter-long bone spear, and the enormous aura of death in the surroundings madly surged into the bone spear. After absorbing the enormous aura of death, the bone spear became as heavy as a mountain. As Pharaoh roared, the spear stabbed towards him. The strips of cloth covering Pharaoh's body fluttered in the air, like a sharp weapon that pulverized his surrounding subordinates. However, when the little skull's bone spear fell, it tore apart the strips of cloth wrapped around his body. The spear pierced through his abdomen and nailed him to the ground. Submit or die. The little skull's enormous presence suddenly enveloped the mummy Lord Pharaoh, who was nailed to the ground by the bone spear. After letting out a mournful howl, the mummy Lord Pharaoh, who was nailed to the ground by the bone spear, finally succumbed to the little skull's ferocious might. He obediently lowered his head towards the little skull and said, "I, the mummy Lord Pharaoh, submit, my lord." Not in a hurry to immediately remove the bone spear from the mummy lord's body, Little Skull used his empty left hand to draw a contract mark in the dusky sky, making the mummy lord hand over a pure brand within his soul. Only then did he disregard the piercing pain of the mummy lord and remove the bone spear from his body. He turned around and said, "Return to the mountain." After the unequal master-slave contract was formed, the mummy lord did not have any leeway to resist. His stiff body slowly crawled up from the ground, taking slow steps as he followed the earth and would elite zombies towards the towering mountain. After seeing everything clearly, Han Shua's heart was filled with indescribable astonishment. At this time, Han Shua finally understood where he was. This was a different dimension where undead creatures existed. Never would Han Shua have thought that the Little Skull and the Earth Elite Zombie would actually have such a large troop in this dimension. It seemed that they were doing quite well. No wonder the Earth Elite Zombie had told him to return last time. From the battle this time, it seemed that the Little Skull had brought the Earth, Wood, and Fire Elite Zombies to carry out a grandiose invasion in this dimension. A Mummy Lord-level undead creature was the same as a bone demon that could only be summoned by a Grand Magus Necromancer. The fact that the Little Skull was able to deal with this Mummy Lord with a single spear was sufficient proof that the current Little Skull's level was higher than the Mummy Lord's. This was something that Han Shua had never imagined. After the Mummy Lord was subdued by the Little Skull, Han Shua suddenly panicked. He suddenly remembered that he did not know how to return to the profound continent. In this space that was forever desolate and silent, there were no people or things that Han Shua was familiar with. If he could only stay in this strange dimension with this consciousness, it would be a complete torture for Han Shua. Right now, even Han Shua's body was formed by his consciousness. Not only could he not enjoy everything, he also could not use any demonic arts. This was extremely disadvantageous for Han Shua. Looking at the Little Skull flying towards the towering bald mountain, Han Shua continuously shouted in an attempt to establish contact with the Little Skull. In the process, a sharp pain suddenly spread throughout Han Shua's body. This kind of pain caused even Han Shua's tenacious nerves to be unable to endure, and his consciousness gradually dissipated. Little Skull, who was walking towards the towering bald mountain with the Earth, Wood, and Fire Elite Zombies, suddenly stopped. He looked towards the area where Han Shua's consciousness had disappeared, and suddenly rode the flying undead monster to the area where Han Shua's consciousness had just been. His purple demon eye shone brightly, full of doubt. Moreover, there were also Han Shua's female friends in this world. They were all humans with flesh and blood like Han Shua, and not creatures of the foreign world like bones or rotten flesh. That was close. This skeletal staff is really strange. Fortunately, it sent me back, or else my life would have been ruined. Han Shua muttered to himself for a while before his gaze once again fell on the skeletal staff. His mind was thinking hard about how he had passed through the layers of planes and descended into that space with his consciousness. However, after thinking for a while, Han Shua still didn't know how he had done it with the skeletal staff. Shaking his head, Han Shua didn't continue thinking about this problem. Instead, he recalled the miraculous performance of the Little Skull in that space. Han Shuo planned to immediately use the skeletal staff to summon the little skull over to take a look. However, when he recalled the changes to the skeletal staff, he felt some lingering fear and temporarily gave up on the idea of immediately summoning the little skull to this plane. I didn't expect the little skull to be doing so well. It looks like he's even more awesome than I was on the profound continent. When did this guy become so powerful? Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh. When he recalled the time when the undead creatures descended into this plane, the expressions of some low-level existences who were afraid of the little skull, he finally understood what was going on. Chapter 350. After roaming around the necromancy paradise, Han Shuo spent the next few days recovering. When his mental strength was fully replenished, he went to the dark forest and caught a few magical beasts, continuing to practice the soul tremor magic. Finally, one day, Han Shuo was able to control his mental strength as he pleased. He shot out a soul tremor magic, and a magical beast collapsed with blood flowing out of its mouth and nose. When this soul tremor magic allowed him to control his mental strength at will, Han Shuo had already mastered all the magus spells of the Archmage realm. Thus, he began to practice the spells that a higher-level Grand Magus Necromancer should be able to master. First and foremost were the summoning spells for bone demons, old fey demons, and mummy lords. As necromancers progressed, not only would they be able to summon higher-level undead creatures, they would also be able to summon more types of creatures. For example, Han Shuo, who was at the level of Grand Magus Necromancer, could summon bone demons, old fey demons, and mummy lords, 3 undead creatures. Although it was said that there were 3 summoning spells, apart from some differences in the incantations, there wasn't much difference in their essence. Bone demons, old fey demons, and mummy lords were undead creatures of the same level. Although their soul imprints were different, the difference in strength wasn't that great. As long as Han Shuo could master the summoning spell for one bone demon, he could change the incantation and summon the other 2 undead creatures as well. However, just like the soul tremor magic, it would become more and more difficult for necromancers to master each spell as they progressed. The last time Han Shuo had possessed Archmage Necromancer Clarendon's understanding of necromancy magic was still completely useless. From this realm onwards, Han Shuo had to slowly study every single necromancy magic he learned. Fortunately, there was a complete set of books within the Cemetery of Death for Han Shuo to study. Among them, there were countless books regarding the essence of necromancy magic. While the 3 evil knights and 12 mystical demons were still refining, Han Shuo spent all his time studying necromancy magic at a deeper level. Time unknowingly passed by a few days. On this day, as Han Shuo was chanting his incantations, he suddenly sensed a familiar aura coming from outside the Cemetery of Death. Suddenly rousing himself from his thoughts, Han Shuo walked out of the Cemetery of Death with the skeletal staff in hand. He said to the pacing dark dragon Gilbert, "Why have you come?" "Honored Master, I sensed your presence. I just happened to be in the Valley of Sunshine, so I came to see you." Dark Dragon Gilbert immediately cheered when he saw Han Shuo appear. Dark Dragon Gilbert hadn't changed much, but Han Shuo felt that Gilbert's aura seemed to have grown a bit stronger. When the charcoal black Gilbert walked into the Cemetery of Death, he immediately took the initiative to report to Han Shuo about Tanai's situation in the Valley of Sunshine. As Dark Dragon Gilbert narrated, Han Shuo gradually understood the situation in the Valley of Sunshine. Ever since Han Shuo had schemed against all the powers gathered by Tanai in the Mithril Mines, the 4 great powers had temporarily called a truce. Instead, they had focused all their attention on finding the mastermind behind the scenes. Previously, Loriton had said that whoever found the mastermind first would maintain order in the Valley of Sunshine. Regardless of whether it was a large or small power, they had all tried to find the mastermind behind the scenes. However, several months had passed without any results. Trunks understood that the real mastermind, Han Shuo, had left long ago. He pretended to be concerned about this matter while silently developing the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Unknowingly, the originally nameless Soul Destroyer mercenary band had gradually become the 5th great power in the Valley of Sunshine due to abundant funds and Trunks' reputation. After eating one of Han Shuo's rebirth pills, Trunks had broken through from Swordmaster to Great Swordmaster. Among the various powers in the Valley of Sunshine, only Loritan, who could go berserk 3 times, could defeat him. Florida and Adam Minlo were both suppressed by him. During this period of time, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band was in the limelight. The Soul Destroyer mercenary band under Trunks' control had absorbed even more outstanding experts. He had changed from his original ruthlessness to more sinister. He was no longer in a hurry to deal with Florida, but planned to slowly torture Florida bit by bit. Dark Dragon Gilbert and Trunks moved together, completing every mission appropriately. During this process, Gilbert often appeared in some brothels, using the martial method taught to him by Han Shuo to secretly absorb some qi. His strength was also rapidly improving. After listening to Gilbert's introduction of the situation in the Valley of Sunshine, Han Shuo was somewhat worried. Trunks' Soul Destroyer mercenary band had become the 5th great power in the Valley of Sunshine. This also meant that the Soul Destroyer mercenary band also had the qualifications to participate in the struggle for power in the Valley of Sunshine. In the past, when the Soul Destroyer mercenary band didn't have this kind of strength, only Florida would spare no effort to kill him. But now that the Soul Destroyers truly had this kind of strength, the other 3 parties would naturally focus more attention on Trunks. Even Loritan of the Berserker tribe wouldn't be as friendly with Trunks as before. After all, Trunks had the strength to threaten their Cairo mercenary band. There were no eternal friends in this world. Once there was a real conflict of interest, it was very likely that some dirty things would happen. Han Shuo pondered for a while, understanding that the development of Trunks and the others in the future wouldn't be so easy. However, Han Shuo believed in Trunks' ability and didn't pay too much attention to this matter. After thinking for a while, he faintly smiled and said to Dark Dragon Gilbert, "I'll give you something. What is it?" After Gilbert had explained the situation in the Valley of Sunshine to Han Shuo in detail, he asked in astonishment after hearing Han Shuo's words. Han Shuo took out the green dragon's magical core from his space ring. The magical core glowed with green energy, and the enormous energy contained within immediately made Gilbert go wild with joy. He screamed, "The core of a super-rank magical beast? That's right, this is the core of a green dragon. I think this core should be useful to you, right?" Han Shuo smiled as he looked at Gilbert and asked. Gilbert nodded incessantly like a chick pecking at rice, his face filled with excitement. He extended his right hand and held the green dragon's demonic core in his palm. He laughed maniacally and said, "It's useful. It's too useful. I can feel the enormous energy contained within. With this green dragon's demonic core, which is of a higher rank than mine, I can definitely evolve to Tier 2. All right then, immediately swallow it and evolve in the Cemetery of Death." This green dragon core had been specially prepared by Han Shuo for Dark Dragon Gilbert. When he saw that Gilbert was about to go crazy with joy and excitement, he smiled at Gilbert. Apart from being a lecher, Dark Dragon Gilbert was indeed a loyal servant. Last time in the Forbidden Land in the depths of the Dark Forest, Dark Dragon Gilbert had displayed loyalty that moved Han Shuo. Otherwise, the crazed Han Shuo might have fallen into the demonic path forever. "Thank you, Master. Master, you are too great. Your loyal servant praises you from the bottom of his heart." Holding the green dragon core, Dark Dragon Gilbert's flattery flowed out endlessly. Gilbert had interacted with others for a long time now, so his flattery skills had improved by another level. He almost didn't repeat a single sentence. All right, just swallow this green dragon core for me. Don't talk so much nonsense." Han Shuo interrupted Gilbert's flattery and said to Gilbert, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. This time, Gilbert didn't waste any more words and nodded excitedly. He said to Han Shuo, "Master, I need to transform into my original form. It's inconvenient in the Cemetery of Death, so I'll go outside." "Go, but be careful. Don't mess up the formations I've set up," Han Shuo hastily reminded when he saw Gilbert excitedly walking out of the Cemetery of Death with the green dragon core in his hands. "Don't worry, Master. I know what to do." Calvin's beard had all turned silver, and he needed to rely on his walking stick when he came over. It looked like he couldn't escape the fate of old age, sickness, and death either. However, Calvin was in good spirits, and his chuckling expression made him appear full of friendliness. Two young dwarves took the initiative to support Calvin when they saw him appear. Bennett said, "Elder, why have you come out?" "Hans here. Of course I had to come and see." "Bennett, I'm not as old as you think I am. Didn't I walk over here alone?" "Heh," Calvin said with a smile. He then bowed to Hans Shua and said, "The dwarves of this valley will forever be grateful for your kindness. There is no business between friends. We will forge as many weapons as you need. This is our attitude towards our friends." Hans Shua's main purpose in coming over this time was to have the dwarves forge some weapons for the lizardmen of the underground world. Hans Shua had promised the ancient lizard king Degasi that he would help him take care of the lizardmen. Although the lizardmen had obtained some weapons from the dead Redbud Knights last time, those weapons were far from enough for them to use. In addition, the lizardmen's bodies were different from ordinary humans. Hans Shua wanted the dwarves to forge some weapons for them. Of course, the city guards of Bretel City also needed weapons forged by the dwarves, because the weapons forged by the dwarves were much more outstanding than those forged by ordinary humans. Calvin listened attentively to Hans Shua's description. When Hans Shua finished, Calvin smiled and said, "Don't worry, the children have been very free recently. We still have enough food and don't need to go out hunting. I will arrange for them to forge the weapons you need." "Many thanks to you, Elder," Hans Shua said with sincere gratitude. "Haha, there's no need to be so polite between friends. It's rare for you to come over. Have a good taste of the fruit wine we just brewed," Calvin said heroically, pulling Hans Shua towards the women who brewed the wine. "All right then, I will drink a few cups with Elder." Hans Shua readily agreed. Chapter 351. Time flew by unknowingly, and in the blink of an eye, more than a month had passed. On this day, 12 consecutive explosions suddenly rang out from within the lifeless cemetery of death. 12 enormous banners exploded one after another amidst the explosions. Hans Shua sat cross-legged in the center, his eyes wide open as he stared fixedly at the crypt in the middle of the 12 banners. The liquid in the crypt had become as black as ink, and bubbles of various sizes were bubbling amidst gurgling sounds. Black mist rose from the crypt and lingered above the cemetery of death without dissipating. Amidst the bubbling sounds, the black ink-like liquid was gradually absorbed by the bodies of the 3 evil knights and their fire-breathing warhorses. The 3 evil knights, who had been submerged in the underground liquid, seemed to have become large sponges as they absorbed the black ink-like liquid into their bodies. The bodies of the 3 evil knights and their mounts had all become as black as ink. Only the eyes of the 3 evil knights and their mounts were like large sponges, absorbing the inky black liquid. Apart from the aura of death that lingered within their bodies, there was also an additional vicious killing intent. Sensing the enormous changes occurring within their bodies, the 3 evil knights silently howled towards the sky, the bone spurs in their hands whistling through the air. Since they no longer had to endure the heart-wrenching pain, the 3 evil knights immediately attempted to attack the power of the contract once more, wanting to break free from Hans Shua's enslavement. Since they no longer had to endure the heart-wrenching pain, the 3 evil knights immediately attempted to attack the power of the contract once more, wanting to break free from Hans Shua's enslavement. High-ranked undead creatures are indeed a bit troublesome. At least you know how to resist. Hans Shua coldly snorted and abruptly stood up from his cross-legged position. He used his mental strength to forcefully suppress the 3 evil knights while abruptly activating a secret demonic technique. The 3 evil knights suddenly let out mournful wails, looking at Hans Shua in fear just like their mounts. The flames in their eyes were as weak as candles in the wind, about to be extinguished at any time. Their bodies and souls were about to dissipate from the heavy blow. The liquid within the crypt contained Hans Shua's blood essence. All of that liquid had been absorbed by the 3 evil knights and their fire-breathing warhorses. In other words, their bodies now contained Hans Shua's blood essence. Based on the blood essence within their bodies, Hans Shua could completely annihilate the 3 evil knights without leaving even a trace of their soul origin power behind. When Han Shuo used his blood essence to punish the three evil knights, the purest fear spread to the three evil knights and their mounts. The evil knights that had just attempted to break free from the power of Han Shuo's contract immediately knelt on the ground with their warhorses, trembling all over. Han Shuo could feel the fear and reverence in the hearts of the three evil knights. With a cold snort, Han Shuo walked in front of the three evil knights who no longer dared to resist and released the seal of darkness magic on each of them. This way, he could directly summon them from the other world. If he didn't release the seal of darkness on them, once Han Shuo teleported them to the other world, he wouldn't be able to summon them again. Without the slightest connection to their bodies, the next evil knights he would summon would be randomly from the other world. In the boundless other world, who knew how many evil knights there were? It wouldn't be so coincidental that he would summon them again. However, as long as he left the seal of darkness on their bodies, when Han Shuo chanted the incantation, he could rely on the connection of the seal to find them anywhere in the other world. He could then directly summon the three evil knights that had been forged by demonic arts to this plane. After leaving the seal of darkness on the three evil knights and the fire-breathing warhorse, Han Shuo planned to directly send them to the other world. Afterwards, he recalled his last trip to the other world. In the other world of Necromancer Paradise, Han Shuo had seen Little Skull, Earth, Fire, and with undead creatures very active. Han Shuo understood that in another plane, Little Skull and the others were currently carrying out a vigorous invasion. Although Little Skull and the others were currently increasing in strength, Han Shuo was well aware of the strength of otherworld creatures. As a necromancer, Han Shuo understood that the Mummy Lord wasn't a powerful otherworld creature. As long as he could grasp the summoning technique of the Necromancer Grand Magus level, Han Shuo would be able to summon undead creatures of the Mummy Lord, Bone Devil, and Old Fei Fei. However, above the Mummy Lord level, there were still the Bone Dragon, Skeleton King, and Zombie King. Undead creatures like the Bone Dragon, Skeleton King, and Zombie King could only be summoned by a sacred Magus-level necromancer. According to legend, if a necromancer surpassed the sacred Magus-level Archmage, they could even summon undead creatures with the strength of demigods in the other world. Just how powerful were these undead creatures? Just what kind of existence were they? Even Han Shuo didn't know. In the boundless otherworld, were there undead creatures that surpassed the strength of demigods? Han Shuo also didn't know. Although Little Skull's strength was constantly increasing, Han Shuo was still somewhat worried about him. Rather than sending the three evil knights back to the other world, it would be better to let the Little Skull take them away and increase the strength of Little Skull's side once again. Thinking up to here, Han Shuo took out the skeletal staff and began chanting necromancy incantations. Ever since the last time he unintentionally escaped into the other world, there was a period of time when Han Shuo had some fear towards the skeletal staff. However, after studying it for a few days and chanting the incantations, he discovered that there was no difference. Han Shuo also didn't know how the last fortuitous encounter happened, so he didn't pay it too much attention. A streak of black light flashed through the void, and the Little Skull descended on the undead creature covered in bone spurs. As soon as the Little Skull arrived from the other world, the three evil knights sensed the familiar aura of death from the other world. When the three evil knights saw that it was only a Little Skull, they simultaneously emitted the aura of a high-level undead creature, as if they wanted to shake the Little Skull. The Little Skull swept a glance at the three evil knights, his purple demon eye glistening. That 3-meter-long bone spur tapped the undead creature covered in bone spurs. The undead creature suddenly roared soundlessly at the three evil knights, and a soaring aura of death suddenly swept over them. The three evil knights, who originally planned to show off their strength to the Little Skull, suddenly felt the strength of that strange undead creature. All of them were startled, and their fear of a high-level undead creature caused them to instinctively retreat a few steps. "Father!" After scaring away the three evil knights, the Little Skull dismounted from the undead creature and walked straight to Han Shuo. When he arrived in front of Han Shuo, he sent a message. "Father?" Han Shuo was suddenly startled. Looking at this Little Skull who had lived with him since the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, and who had secretly helped him take out the trash in the middle of the night, Han Shuo was shocked by this form of address and didn't know what to say for a moment. "Father, you've been to my hometown, haven't you?" The little skull arrived in front of Han Shuo and stabbed his 3-meter-long bone spur into the ground. He raised his head and blinked his purple demon eye at Han Shuo, sending a message. Han Shuo was stunned by the little skull calling him father. He suddenly discovered that he couldn't see through the little skull more and more. From simple communication before, to now that the little skull could actually directly ask him questions, the little skull had only spent a total of 2 years. Han Shuo looked at the little skull standing in front of him, his purple demon eye glistening with light, and was shocked to the extreme. After a long while, he seemed to wake up from his shock and nodded. "Yes, I went to another world last time." After a pause, Han Shuo hesitated for a while before asking, "Do you already have your own complete consciousness? Why do you call me father? What's going on?" "You created me, and my body has your blood. You've always treated me like a child. You are my father." The little skull blinked his purple demon eye and continued to send a message. "Father, not only do I have a complete consciousness, but I also have some other magical powers. These are all given to me by you." The short little skull had always been treated like a child by Han Shuo, especially after he left the Babylon Academy. The little skull's somewhat childish behavior always gave Han Shuo the illusion that he was treating him as a child. Perhaps it was because Han Shuo had unknowingly treated the little skull as his own child. Through the mental connection between the little skull and Han Shuo, he sensed the doting and love from Han Shuo, and gradually treated Han Shuo as a father. Han Shuo's mind was in a mess for a while. He was shocked by the little skull suddenly calling him father. At this time, Han Shuo had a stomach full of questions, but he didn't know where to start. After frowning for a while, Han Shuo said, "I've modified the 3 evil knights. Their strength should have increased a lot. Take them away, they should be able to help you." "Thank you, father. I will discipline them well." The little skull let out a cry of joy. In front of Han Shuo, he did not have the majesty that he had in the other world. Instead, he was like a naughty child. The little skeleton pulled out the 3-meter-long bone spur that he'd stabbed into the ground and walked towards the 3 evil knights with the bone spur in his hand. As the little skull dragged the 3-meter-long bone spur toward the 3 evil knights, the aura of death on his body gradually thickened. The aura of death in the cemetery of death was like a whirlpool that spun at high speed around his body. The 3 evil knights suddenly trembled. The inextinguishable flames in their eyes stared at the 7 bone spurs on the little skull's back. It was as if they already knew the origin of this unusual little skull. The might of a high-level undead creature against a low-level creature was simply impossible for them to resist. When the little skull arrived in front of the 3 evil knights, he arrogantly used the bone spur to hit the bodies of the 3 evil knights and their fire-breathing warhorses, as if giving the 3 evil knights some orders. The 3 evil knights and their mounts emitted crisp, dang-dang sounds as they were hit by the little skull's bone spur. The flames in the 3 evil knights' eyes flickered violently. They appeared to be subservient, as if they had already submitted to the tyranny of the little skull. Han Shuo watched the little skull tame the 3 evil knights with a face full of disbelief. Even Han Shuo himself had to use the blood essence in their bodies to deal with these 3 evil knights. He didn't expect that the little skull didn't need to use it at all. It was as if the little skull directly used his high-level status to suppress them, and they didn't dare to raise their heads. He didn't know if it was because the cultivation method was different, or because the little skull, the earth, wood, and fire elite zombies started off as low-level creatures. But when Han Shuo used the demonic arts to refine them, they didn't resist in the slightest and happily accepted Han Shuo's refinement. When refining the little skull, Han Shuo felt a kind of spiritual connection with him. Han Shuo was sure that the little skull not only obtained power from him, but also a part of his memories. Otherwise, the little skull would never be able to use the 7 bone spurs to unimpeded use of the demonic art of control. The Fire Elite Zombie, Earth Elite Zombie, and Wood Elite Zombie had been refined using the secret method of refining zombies. Apart from absorbing the materials that Han Shuo had painstakingly gathered, they had also absorbed the yuan energy of the 5 extremes of the place of extremes. The yuan energy of earth, wood, and fire that had been nurtured between heaven and earth for an unknown amount of time was immeasurable in their vastness and preciousness. Perhaps it was for this reason that Little Skeleton, Fire Elite Zombie, Earth Elite Zombie, and Wood Elite Zombie were able to communicate with Han Shuo's mind. Not only did they possess miraculous abilities, they also possessed the ability to evolve. On the other hand, Han Shuo could only simply give orders to the 3 evil knights of a higher level. They didn't have the ability to communicate with Han Shuo's mind. They didn't have several fortuitous encounters like the Little Skull, which allowed them to possess a portion of Han Shuo's demonic arts memories. They also didn't have the ability to absorb an enormous amount of the elements of heaven and earth like the Wood Elite Zombie and the other 3. At first, their levels were much higher than the skeletons and zombies, but they still tried to resist the modifications that Han Shuo had made to their bodies. Perhaps it was because of these various reasons that although they had also become somewhat stronger, they were still far inferior to the 4 undead creatures that Han Shuo had first refined. Father, they will be obedient in the future. The Little Skull pointed at the 3 trembling evil knights and said to Han Shuo, who had sunk into deep thought, "Hee, let me send you back. My mind is in a bit of a mess right now." Han Shuo smiled at the Little Skull and was about to release magic when he suddenly looked at the flying undead creature on the Little Skull's back. He asked, "Right, what is this strange fellow? How come I've never heard of it before?" "Oh, he was originally a bone demon. Father found me a lot of good bones last time. After I dismantled the bone demon, I used some of the best bones to make wings for him. Father, did I make him look ugly?" Seeing that everything in the Cemetery of Death was progressing in an orderly manner, Han Shuo once again returned to Bredel City. After leaving Bredel City for a period of time, the current Bredel City seemed to have suddenly become a lot more lively. In the past, the streets of Bredel City were cold and desolate with basically no pedestrians. However, as soon as Han Shuo returned to Bredel City and released the Een Demon to patrol the city, he suddenly discovered that many changes had unknowingly occurred in Bredel City. This kind of change made Han Shuo very happy as the city lord. Because the mountain people from the surrounding mountains had migrated into Bredel City, the population of Bredel City had increased. In addition, the merchants who'd tasted the sweetness of Bredel City had all flocked to Bredel City. Not only did they bring all kinds of goods that Bredel City needed, some bold merchants had even started to open shops in various districts of Bredel City. After satisfying the demand for food, some gorgeous clothes and daily necessities were all taken out by the shrewd merchants to be sold. Although Bredel City's population wasn't large, the monthly salary that the youths received after joining the city guard was very generous. The gold coins that the simple and honest youth received every month would be used to improve his originally poor family. As long as a family had a young soldier, they would be able to live happily in Bredel City. The enthusiasm to join the army was unprecedentedly high. Even some impoverished youths in Seamus City would take the risk and come to Bredel City to join the army. Unknowingly, the number of city guards had increased from the original 3,000 to the current 5,000. With the battle maniac Dorcas around, Jack didn't even need to spend gold coins to forge equipment for these soldiers. During this time, Dorcas had led his soldiers to compete with Fox elite knights, encircling and annihilating some of the bandit groups that had invaded Bredel City. Dorcas and Fox actions were very effective. Not only had they eliminated 2 bandit groups, but they'd also plundered enough gold coins from their old lair to equip their soldiers. It had only taken a few months for Bredel City to go from being wantonly humiliated to taking the initiative to attack. The changes in Bredel City gradually aroused the attention of the 7 Grand Duchies. The 7 Grand Duchies that had been in the midst of war suddenly all stopped fighting. The dukes of the 7 Grand Duchies suddenly had a feeling that the wolf was coming. As the Een Demon circled around Bredel City, Han Shuo also learned of the current situation in Bredel City from Dick and Chester. Dorcas and Falk had each taken 1,000 soldiers and left Bredel City, still sweeping up some of the larger bandit groups in the surroundings. Dorcas was superior in leading troops and strategy, while Falk was equipped with standard knight equipment. The two seemed to be secretly competing against each other as they violently swept up the surrounding bandit groups. During this process, the soldiers under their command became more and more skilled in battle, gradually gaining true sharpness. Brian, many merchants have come to the city. If the current situation continues to develop, Bredel City will definitely become a big city that attracts people to migrate to. The fat on Jack's round face jiggled as he continued. I think it won't be long before those mountain people come down from above. Bredel City's welfare is so good right now. It's much more profitable than mining. No, it won't be long. Right now, the 5 mountain chiefs have already made up their minds. Apart from the old Adelman who doesn't have any lofty ambitions, the other 4 young mountain chiefs all want to lead their original subordinates to become part of Bredel City's regular army. Dick looked at Han Shuo and smiled wryly. Those 4 fellows have urged me many times, wanting me to talk to my lord. It's just that my lord hasn't been in the city, so this matter has been delayed. Han Shuo's expression changed when he heard Dick's words. He asked with great interest, "What's going on? Aren't they doing well with the surrounding ores?" That depends on who they're compared to. Compared to ordinary poor people, their income from the mines is pretty good. However, when compared to the welfare of Bredel City's soldiers, their income from the ores is simply not enough to support the daily expenses of so many subordinates. All along, the mountain people haven't had a good life. Now that my lord has greatly improved the treatment of the soldiers, this treatment is far greater than their income from mining. In addition, Dorcas and Falk have seized many weapons, armor, and even gold coins in the process of wiping out the bandits. This kind of violence is far from what mining can compare to. The 7 Grand Duchies are so chaotic, so the easiest way to make money is through war. Whether it's selling weapons, war horses, or directly becoming bandits, they're all the fastest ways to accumulate wealth. My lord's Bredel City has developed so quickly because of plundering other people's wealth. For the mountain people, following my lord is obviously much more promising than mining. Moreover, Dorcas and Falk have also brought back some bandit slaves. With these slaves, mining doesn't require so much manpower. Strong mountain people are all experts in battle. It's only natural that they want to join the army, Dick explained to Han Shuo. Hearing Dick's words, Han Shuo smiled and said, "It looks like everything is for profit. I just don't know how loyal these mountain people are." "My lord, with you in Bredel City, do you think they would dare to be disloyal?" Chester suddenly said with a smile at this time. On the off chance that those young leaders were good-for-nothings, not only would Han Shuo not be able to get back the gold coins he'd invested, it might even bring hidden dangers to Bredel City. After becoming the city lord of Bredel City, Han Shuo's attitude towards problems had become more and more meticulous as he'd grown. He no longer blindly played dirty and ruthless tricks like before. "All right, I will definitely convey Lord Dick's words." Dick didn't dare to guarantee anything after hearing Han Shuo's words, because Han Shuo's conditions were indeed a bit harsh. Chapter 352. 3 days later, the 5 mountain chiefs once again gathered in Bredel City. Apart from the oldest Adelman, the 4 younger mountain chiefs all agreed to Han Shuo's request. Even Adelman, who'd lost his lofty ambitions, had most of the mountain people in his minds leave the mountain to join the army. After some discussion with the 4 young mountain chiefs, they decided that he would be in charge of the mining of the surrounding 5 mines. A portion of the ore obtained would also be given to the 4 young men. Bredel City was brimming with vitality. More than 8,000 mountain people had come down from the 5 mines. Dorcas had returned after hearing the news and split the troops into 4 large groups. The 4 large groups' captains were all on Han Shuo's side. Although the mountain people had received a portion of the weapons and armor last time, they were far from enough for 8,000 people. Only 3,000 of them had received a portion of the weapons and armor, while the other 5,000 still used simple weapons. With Jack and Dorcas' help, a weaponry workshop jointly funded by the Buzzed Merchant Guild began operating on the original Mount Silk. Bredel City invested in the purchase of facilities for smelting metal ores, while the Buzzed Merchant Guild was responsible for recruiting skilled blacksmiths. Because Han Shuo had the dwarves of the Dark Forest to help him, The weapons workshop on Mount Silk was mainly in charge of forging armor for warriors. The dwarves were highly skilled in forging weapons, but they weren't as meticulous as humans when it came to refining armor. Under Dorcas' meticulous training, the mountain people were divided into 4 large groups and trained vigorously outside Brettel City. Dorcas, who'd graduated from the Imperial Military Academy, was indeed a talented general. Under his fierce training, the 8,000 mountain people's combat strength had increased to a certain extent. After Falk returned from outside, he started instructing the 8,000 mountain people on how to familiarize themselves with war chariots, ballistae, and catapults. These kinds of powerful defensive equipment often required strong people to operate. The mountain people were the best candidates. Under Falk's guidance, the mountain people slowly familiarized themselves with the use of war chariots and other equipment at the 4 gates of Brettel City. My lord, the moats that were originally dug at the 4 gates of Brettel City were all low-lying sewage. Now that we have these 8,000 mountain people, we can spend some time digging the 4 moats even deeper. This way, even if the 7 Grand Duchies invade, the moats will be littered with their corpses. One day, Dorcas found Han Shuo and proposed. Brettel City's moat had originally been half-excavated, but due to the Lancelot Empire's repeated defeats against the 7 Grand Duchies, they had been unable to excavate the moat. In the end, Brettel City was reduced to a chicken rib, and the moat was slowly forgotten by everyone. Dorcas had a keen mind for war. He had long since seen the value of the moat at Brettel City's city gates. Adding to the fact that the moat was already in its embryonic form, it wouldn't be a difficult project to complete as long as they spent some time and manpower. Once the moat at Brettel City's city gates was successfully deepened, it would be a huge blow to the invading enemies. This proposal was almost immediately approved by Han Shuo. The mountain people, who had just relaxed from familiarizing themselves with the various siege equipment, immediately became laborers again, joining in the excavation of the 4 moats. Due to Han Shuo's arrival, the number of Dark Mantle members in Brettel City had increased by quite a bit. Under Dick's arrangements, the Dark Mantle members were dispersed to the 7 Grand Duchies, continuously reporting the latest news to Dick. Dick would then report any news that was beneficial to Brettel City to Han Shuo. As the second Dark Sun emissary, Han Shuo's position was much higher than Dick's. Han Shuo even had the authority to directly award merits and rewards to members of the Dark Mantle. Under Han Shuo's deliberate promotion, Chester had become an existence second only to Dick in Brettel City's Dark Mantle organization. Chester's position in the Dark Mantle had also risen by a level. One day, Han Shuo, who was studying necromancy magic in Brettel City, was suddenly found by Adelman. Delia of Mount Silk, who had already joined the army, was also among them. City Lord, many stone men have suddenly appeared in the mine in the belly of Mount Silk. These stone men have attacked the miners deep within the mountain, causing the deaths of more than 10 miners. The stone men are not afraid of magic, and their bodies are very sturdy. We don't know how to deal with them. Please help us, my lord. Adelman immediately explained the ins and outs of the matter after finding Han Shuo. Han Shuo was taken aback. He furrowed his brows and asked, "Stone men? How could there be stone men in the mine? Has this ever happened before?" Delia, who was dressed in soft armor, had a tall nose and slender legs. She was very eye-catching as she stood there. She shook her head and replied, "No, there's never been one before. Ever since my father took over Mount Silk, I've never heard of a stone man inside." Delia was originally the chief of the mountain people of Mount Silk. Even now, there were many of her former subordinates on Mount Silk. Mount Silk was the place where Delia's father's generation had lived. Now that stone men had appeared in the mine, she, the former chief of the mountain people, expressed her strong concern. Those stone men appeared in the center of Mount Silk. Did they suddenly discover their existence in the newly opened area? Han Shuo frowned and asked Adelman. Now, not only did the mountain people mine for ores, but there was also a weapons workshop in cooperation with Brettel City and the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Every day, Mount Silk could produce a dozen or so good armors. When more blacksmiths arrived at Mount Silk, the weapons workshop would be able to operate to Han Shuo's satisfaction. There were many iron and copper ores in Mount Silk. These ores could be directly smelted into iron and copper, then mixed with other metals. A skilled blacksmith could then forge them into armor. For Han Shuo, Mount Silk wasn't just a mine. The successful operation of the weapons workshop was also very important. Therefore, he was very concerned about Adelman's matter. Yes, my lord. When we dug deeper into the mountain, we discovered that the iron ore there was even more abundant. Just as we were about to deploy our men to do a big job, a group of stone men appeared out of nowhere. These stone men seemed to have very low intelligence and couldn't communicate with us at all. In any case, they immediately attacked us and killed many of our miners, Adelman replied. I see. Han Shuo thought for a moment, then nodded and said, I'll go with you to Mount Silk and see what's going on with the stone men in the mines. Many thanks, my lord. Adelman was gratified. My lord, Mount Silk used to be my home. Even now, there are still many of my friends there. I would like to go with you to take a look. I hope my lord will allow me to do so. Delia looked at Han Shuo with her big bright eyes and pleaded. After entering the army, they had to obey all orders. They were no longer allowed to do as they pleased. It looked like Dorcas's training during this period of time had paid off. This Delia was much more disciplined than when Han Shuo had first met her. Nodding, Han Shuo replied, All right. At the foot of Mount Silk, one could still see a lot of greenery. However, the higher one went, the less green there was. At a glance, all one could see were grotesquely shaped rocks. There were no longer any flowers or grass. Spring had arrived, and the weather was warm and comfortable. Han Shuo, Adelman, Delia, and a few mountain people walked towards Mount Silk. Because Adelman was older, he couldn't walk fast. Han Shuo could only slowly walk up the mountain with him. Along the way, Delia, who was clad in a soft armor, shone brilliantly. Her arms and calves were exposed, and she wore a shiny silver armor on her chest and abdomen. Under the sunlight, the silver armor on her body glistened, and when combined with the luster of her wheat-colored skin, it dazzled the eyes of a few young mountain people who were protecting Adelman. Within Bretel City, Delia was publicly recognized as the #1 beauty of the mountain people. Her own strength was extraordinary. In her previous life, she had held a high position, and ordinary youths didn't dare to be presumptuous. However, now that she had become an ordinary squad leader, her outstanding strength still surpassed that of Zack and Kent. Ordinary young mountain people still couldn't attract her attention. On the way to Mount Silk, Han Shuo's mind was constantly thinking about the stone men in the belly of the mountain. His heart was full of doubts, and he didn't know where those stone men had come from. He didn't pay any attention to Delia, who was infatuated with the surrounding mountain people. City Lord, how do you plan to deal with those stone men? Delia suddenly asked Han Shuo when they were about to reach the middle of Mount Silk. Han Shuo, who had been secretly thinking, turned his head and revealed a brilliant smile, saying, Let's see when we get there. Before I see those stone men, I don't know how to deal with them. If that's the case, if the stone men attack us like they did to my people, what should we do? Delia's bright eyes looked at Han Shuo as she continued to ask. Then let them forever turn into stone. Han Shuo replied in a relaxed manner. Hearing Han Shuo's words, Delia nodded hatefully and said, They dared to kill my people. I definitely won't let them off. Those damned stone men. I will make them pay the price. It seemed that Delia was very concerned about the dozen or so miners that had been killed. From this, Han Shuo could see that Delia was a responsible person. Even though she was no longer in charge of Mount Silk, she had immediately requested to come with Han Shuo to see what was going on when she found out that Mount Silk was facing a crisis. This showed that Delia really treated her subordinates quite well. After Han Shuo expressed his attitude towards the stone men, Delia seemed to relax a lot in front of Han Shuo. She then excitedly asked about Han Shuo's experiences, especially about how Han Shuo had ruthlessly challenged the experts of various cities in the Lancelot Empire and left no survivors. There was also the battle with Leah Kane of the Brute Merchant Alliance. Delia displayed a strong interest in these matters. There were currently many merchants from Austin City and Bretel City. These merchants were very familiar with some of Han Shuo's experiences. After arriving in Bretel City, Out of reverence for Han Shuo, they continuously narrated some of Han Shuo's heroic deeds to the citizens of Bretel City, adding oil to the fire. Unknowingly, all the citizens of Bretel City knew of Han Shuo's past experiences. In addition, Han Shuo's performance in facing the 4 bandit groups had been publicized by some of the citizens. Currently, Han Shuo's prestige in Bretel City was beyond imagination. To the citizens of Bretel City, a city lord who could bring them stability and prosperity was far more prestigious than the king who had abandoned them in Asan City. Han Shuo didn't say much in response to Delia's enthusiastic questioning, only giving her a few perfunctory replies. However, the more indifferent Han Shuo appeared, the more interested Delia became. Along the way, she didn't tire of asking questions about Han Shuo's challenges to various experts. While Han Shuo was having a headache, the group finally arrived at the cave entrance leading to the mine in the belly of the mountain. There were already a dozen or so miners covered in dirt and dust waiting at the cave entrance. When they saw Delia appear, these young miners were full of surprise, cheering leader. From these miners' sincere joy towards Delia, Han Shuo knew that Delia should be a good leader in their hearts. Han Shuo looked at Delia a few more times in astonishment. When Delia saw Han Shuo looking at her in astonishment, she proudly puffed out her full chest, as if saying, "Did you see that? Actually, this lady is also very powerful." Han Shuo couldn't help laughing at Delia's behavior, but didn't comment much. When Delia used the tone of a leader to question the miners, Han Shuo had already released a demon according to the contents of their conversation. It slowly flew towards the area they were talking about. "Let's go inside and see what's going on." While Han Shuo was using the demon to explore deeper inside, Delia spoke to the waiting miners. "Wait, Mr. Adelman. It's better if you don't go in." Han Shuo suddenly said, "It's a bit cold and damp inside. Elder is an adult, just wait outside for a while." Adelman didn't insist. He knew that with his current condition, he would only be a burden if he went inside. He smiled and agreed, saying, "Thank you for your understanding, my lord." Nodding with a smile, Han Shuo glanced at Delia and the others before walking into the dim mine. Chapter 353. The cave was damp and dark. As an outsider, Han Shuo, who was supposed to be led by someone else, walked forward as if he was very familiar with the cave. In the beginning, Delia had thought that Han Shuo would take the initiative to retreat to the back after entering. Who would have thought that Han Shuo hadn't taken a single step back from start to finish? He was actually very familiar with the area and acted as a guide, heading straight into the depths of the mine without making any mistakes. After a while, Delia couldn't restrain her own curiosity under the puzzled gazes of the miners and quickly caught up to Han Shuo. She looked at Han Shuo with her large, bright eyes and asked, "City Lord, you've been to Mount Silk before?" Shaking his head, Han Shuo replied, "No, this is my first time here." "What about it? Then why are you so familiar with the terrain of the mine? I can tell that you didn't even consider which path to take when you came in. You just went straight in and didn't make a single mistake. If you haven't been to Mount Silk before, how can you be so familiar with the detours in the mine?" Delia's doubts grew stronger and stronger as she asked the relaxed Han Shuo. In Han Shuo's eyes, the strength of this group of people, including Delia, was very low. Since there were stone people in the depths of the cave who didn't fear magic and had hard bodies, Han Shuo didn't want them to be suddenly killed. With the demon leading the way, according to Han Shuo's description of the miners, Han Shuo unnaturally didn't slow down in the slightest. He didn't expect to arouse Delia's doubts. Han Shuo chuckled and said, "When I came in, didn't I hear you talking about the situation inside? Hee. I have a very sensitive intuition about the terrain inside the cave. From your description, I can accurately find the place you mentioned. Do you believe me?" Delia had a face of astonishment after hearing Han Shuo's explanation. She then asked doubtfully, "Really?" "Of course." Han Shuo smiled and said, "I've never been to Mount Silk before, and I certainly wouldn't have had the chance to explore this mine. If I didn't have a keen intuition for the cave's terrain, how could I be so familiar with it?" Delia thought about it carefully. With Han Shuo's status as the city lord of Bretel City and his status as a count, He definitely wouldn't come to this mine for no reason. Now that she heard Han Shua's explanation, she actually believed 80% of Han Shua's words. When she looked at Han Shua again, there was a bit more admiration in her eyes. She thought to herself, the city lord is indeed, as the rumors say, a truly amazing man. Seeing that Delia didn't ask any more questions, Han Shua continued on his way. With Han Shua's control over the Yin demons, he truly played the role of a guide, turning from guest to host as he led the way. The miners and Delia in the mines of Mount Silk had instead become his attendants. Han Shua's remaining Yin demon slowly penetrated deep into the belly of Mount Silk. According to the miner's description of Delia, the Yin demon had arrived at a narrow and dry area. There were 3 cave entrances around this area that led deeper into the mountain. The rock overhead was very low, so if one wanted to pass through it, they would have to crawl. According to the miners, the last time they'd been mining here, they'd encountered some stone men. From the traces in the surroundings, there were indeed traces of mining here. However, the Yin demon was invisible and formless. Even if the stone men were hiding in the dark, they wouldn't be able to discover the Yin demon's existence. After finding the correct location, Han Shua's speed increased a bit. Delia and the miners behind him were all astonished when they saw Han Shua's extremely nimble body shuttling through the cave. Delia truly believed what Han Shua had just said. She believed that he had an innate intuition for caves and could find the correct location in the intricate and complicated paths. City Lord, be careful. The area in front of us is where the stone men have appeared before. Suddenly, a panting miner reminded Han Shua, who was still flying ahead. Seeing Han Shua slowly slow down after this reminder, Delia panted a few times to calm her chest. Only then did she say to Han Shua, "My lord, be careful. Those stone men shouldn't be easy to deal with. It's better for us to advance slowly." Delia wasn't as carefree as she appeared, but she was quite attentive at critical moments. Han Shua couldn't help but look at Delia in surprise. Delia only stopped when he looked at her. Her slightly swaying twin peaks attracted more of Han Shua's attention. Han Shua's heart fluttered, and he couldn't help but look at her chest a few more times. It was said that any woman could sense the gazes of the surrounding men on a certain part of her body. No matter how stealthily those men peeped, the woman being stared at would be able to sense if that man had ever secretly glanced at her chest. This saying did make some sense. Although they were in a dark cave, Delia was still able to sense Han Shua's gaze. Han Shua's gaze lingered on her towering chest for a while, making Delia a little shy. Her originally straight back instinctively bent a little, as if she wanted to hide the fullness of her chest through the curve of her waist. "All right, I think we're about to reach there. You guys come closer so that I can take care of you if there's any danger." Han Shua slowed down his footsteps, looked ahead, and instructed the few people behind him. The miners quickly followed. However, Delia, who was supposed to be the first to lean towards Han Shua, was instead the last. Fortunately, the light in the mine was dim, and the miners didn't have eyes as good as Han Shua's. Because of the distance between them, they naturally couldn't see the bright red on Delia's pretty face. Along the way, they took turns to drill through 3 tunnels. After walking for a few hundred meters, the rocks above their heads slowly became much lower, and the tunnel became narrower and narrower. It could only accommodate 2 people walking side by side. At this time, everyone had to bend down to prevent their heads from hitting the rocks. After everyone passed through this narrow tunnel, they appeared in the area where the Yin demons stayed. This area was quite large, but the rocks above their heads were very low. There were 3 caves around it, and the 3 caves were flat. If one wanted to pass through, they had to lie down. This was the place where the miners had encountered the stone men last time. The stone men had suddenly appeared and immediately attacked the miners, causing a lot of casualties among the miners. Han Shua was more than 9 meters tall, but he couldn't walk normally even if he bent down. He had to squat down to look around. The miners who had been here before all looked extremely nervous and cautious. They were holding crude mining tools in their hands, as if they were ready to deal with the stone men at any time. Even Delia was a little nervous. She pulled out the dagger tied to her left leg and looked around vigilantly. Han Shuo and Delia were relatively close. Because they would have to face the stone men's attacks at any time, Delia's shyness had long been thrown out the window. It was because of Han Shuo's ferocious reputation that these miners and Delia felt that they had something to rely on. Otherwise, they wouldn't be nervous but fearful just by being in this area. Han Shuo, who was squatting down, looked around and asked the miners beside him, "How tall are the stone men? What do they look like?" "They are only 1.5 meters tall, but their bodies are very wide. They can move freely in this area and aren't restricted by the low walls," one of the miners replied. After hearing this, Han Shuo looked around at the 3 caves that were even lower. He discovered that the 3 caves that could only be entered by lying down were only 1 meter tall. According to the miner, the stone men that were 1.5 meters tall and had very wide bodies shouldn't be able to enter from these 3 caves. Apart from the 3 caves that were even lower, the only cave that Han Shuo's group came from was the cave that they came from. Since the stone men didn't come from the other 3 caves, could they have come from the cave that Han Shuo's group came from? Han Shuo's heart was filled with doubts. He didn't continue to squat down and look around. Instead, he squatted down in the middle. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo suddenly let out a soft whistle. The whistle started out soft, but it gradually became louder and louder. In the end, it was as if a giant dragon was roaring. All right, if the stone men are nearby, they will definitely come after hearing the news. It looked like they had only come out of the 3 narrow caves as souls, and then used the rocks in this area to reconstruct their stone bodies. "You 8, you've recovered. Are you ready to attack?" Crouching here, Han Shuo took out the skeletal staff and casually summoned a few dozen skeletal warriors and zombie warriors, surrounding Delia and the miners. He looked at the 8 stone men in the dark corner as he spoke. The rock walls in this area were too low, making it difficult for high-level hate warriors and evil knights to display their might. Only the shorter skeletal warriors and zombie warriors would be able to move freely in this area. Delia was startled at first when she was suddenly surrounded by a group of skeletal warriors and zombie warriors. Those undead creatures naturally didn't look that good, and when she was suddenly surrounded by a large group of dark creatures filled with a gloomy aura of death, she naturally panicked. But when she heard Han Shuo's words and saw that the undead creatures were only surrounding her in the center without any intention of attacking, she finally realized that Han Shuo had summoned them to protect them. She immediately relaxed. "City Lord, have those stone men appeared?" Having calmed down, Delia reacted to Han Shuo's words and gripped the dagger in her hand as she called out. The lighting here was too dim, and the 8 stone men were even darker in the shadows. Delia and the others had no way of seeing any traces of the stone men. Nodding, Han Shuo smiled faintly and said, "That's right, 8 stone men." While Han Shuo and Delia were talking, the 8 stone men scattered in the corners suddenly started attacking Han Shuo, abruptly walking out from the 8 corners. Their bodies were all formed from the ready-made iron or here. Ordinary magical attacks naturally wouldn't have much effect on these stone men, and even ordinary weapons wouldn't pose much of a threat to their bodies. No wonder so many miners had died here last time. However, to Han Shuo, his own body was probably even sturdier than iron and stone. He didn't even need to take out the Demon's Lair edge to deal with these 8 stone golems. He squatted down and started fighting with the stone golems. "Interesting, what kind of creatures are you?" Han Shuo was surrounded by the 8 stone men. His body was fighting with the 8 stone men, but he still had the leisure to ask the 8 stone men questions. Delia, who was surrounded by undead creatures, saw that the crouching Han Shuo wasn't afraid of the stone men's attacks. Even when the stone men's rock-solid fists and feet bombarded Han Shuo's body, he didn't react at all. It was as if his body was even sturdier than these stone men made of iron and stone. Unarmed, Han Shuo bombarded the stone men with his fists, but instead, the stone men were forced to retreat step by step. When those steel-hard stones collided with Han Shuo's huge fists, the sound of metal clashing rang out, causing Delia and the others to be dumbstruck. On the profound continent, swordsmen and knights were the most adept at close combat. However, Even swordsmen and knights used fighting aura to increase their physical defenses. They had never heard of a person who could contend against iron and stone without using any fighting aura. In fact, Han Shuo really didn't use demonic yuan to defend himself. He was indeed only using the sturdiness of his body to withstand the stone men's attacks. Having reached the separate demonic realm, Han Shuo's body was as sturdy as iron and stone. Even if he didn't use demonic yuan to defend himself, he could completely withstand the damage from ordinary blades and swords. After fighting for a while, Han Shuo discovered that the 8 stone men didn't show any signs of communicating. He gradually grew impatient and began to gather some fighting aura in his hands. In this way, the stone men's bodies also began to be unable to withstand Han Shuo's punches. Grabbing the neck of a stone man, Han Shuo disregarded the stone man's hammering on his chest and forcefully twisted it. The stone man's iron head was directly pulled off. The crouching Han Shuo's speed suddenly increased. His punches were imbued with demonic yuan. The stone men, as hard as iron and stone, couldn't bear the heavy burden and one by one shattered into stone fragments. In just the blink of an eye, the 8 stone men had become stone fragments on the ground. In the eyes of Delia and the others, there was no longer a complete stone. "City Lord, you're so strong." A miner couldn't help but murmur, his face full of worship. Delia's beautiful eyes sparkled as she stared fixedly at Han Shuo. Han Shuo's actions of crushing the 8 stone golems into dust with his fists with the force of a thunderbolt was simply captivating to the extreme in the eyes of this wild woman who believed in tough men. Her heart couldn't help but become excited. "Wanna run? Heh, it won't be that easy." After the 8 stone men's bodies were destroyed by Han Shuo, the 8 gray auras that drifted out from the 3 caves seemed to know that Han Shuo wasn't someone they could deal with and were preparing to return the way they came. Whether it was his identity as a demonic practitioner or a necromancer, Han Shuo had ways to deal with these strange soul auras. Han Shuo stretched out his left hand, and a miniature vortex filled with killing intent formed in his palm. This vortex didn't have any effect on the physical body, but it made the 8 auras feel an irresistible suction force. Not only were the 8 souls unable to take a step away from Han Shuo, but under the suction force of the vortex in Han Shuo's palm, one by one, they slowly fell into the vortex in Han Shuo's palm. When the 8 souls fell into Han Shuo's palm, they were tightly sucked in by the vortex, not a single one able to leave. "Speak. What the hell are you?" This time, Han Shuo didn't speak. Instead, he used his consciousness to transmit the message. The originally gray aura of the 8 souls slowly dissipated under the high rotation of the vortex, turning into 8 little dots that sparkled with green light. Within the vortex in Han Shuo's palm, the 8 little dots that sparkled with green light were like 8 bright and beautiful stars. The vortex in Han Shuo's palm was like the deep Milky Way. The originally somewhat gloomy scene was filled with an intoxicating beauty in Delia's eyes. It was as if the deep starry sky was in Han Shuo's palm, and the faint green starlight was so resplendent and gorgeous. At this moment, if someone asked her if there was a man who could pluck the stars in the sky for her, she wouldn't hesitate to answer that the man was right in front of her, and that he already had the entire starry sky in his hands. After Han Shuo's consciousness transmitted the message, Han Shuo sensed a weak response. These 8 souls were too weak compared to Han Shuo's powerful consciousness, so the message they transmitted was also very weak. "Please let us go. We are miners who died after the mine collapsed. Our souls didn't dissipate, but drifted to a strange place and absorbed a strange power to become like this." As Han Shuo listened with rapt attention, he gradually understood the message. He stared blankly for a moment and asked, "What's so special about it?" "We don't know either. In any case, there is a strange power everywhere. We don't know why. After we absorbed some of that power, our souls gradually became stronger. We can also use that power to manipulate stones, giving ourselves a stone body. We don't want the place that can make us strong to be destroyed, so we attacked the miners who were about to mine there. Please let us go. We won't dare to do it again." In the palm of Han Shuo, the 8 souls seemed to have united, and the message transmitted gradually became clear. After listening for a while, Han Shua frowned in doubt at first, then his mind flashed, and he suddenly became ecstatic. Haha, I know. So that's how it is. This ecstatic shout was not transmitted through consciousness, but a real high-pitched cheer. Delia and the others, who were surrounded by the undead, were startled by Han Shua's sudden shout. They looked at Han Shua somewhat inexplicably, not knowing why Han Shua was suddenly so happy. City Lord, what's wrong? At this time, Delia looked at Han Shua again. She didn't know why she always felt that Han Shua was full of bewitching attraction, so she asked tenderly. It's nothing. Han Shua took out the skeletal staff and sent the undead that surrounded Delia and the others back to the other plane. After thinking for a moment, he said, "You don't have to mine this area anymore. Otherwise, you will encounter danger. In the future, you only need to come once a month to get the ore. The stone men won't attack you again, so don't worry. All right, you should leave first. I'll take care of the matters here." After hearing Han Shua's words, Delia and the others were full of doubts. They only saw Han Shua easily destroy the stone men, but they didn't know why Han Shua would say such a thing. "Sir, can you tell us what's going on?" Delia thought for a moment, and then asked Han Shua. "Oh, the stone men have pledged allegiance to me. In the future, they will mine a portion of the ore every month, and I guarantee that it will be more than what you mine. You only need to come once a month to get it. I promise them that the area inside the 3 caves will be their living place, and the condition is that they help you mine the ore." Han Shua explained to Delia with a smile. "But didn't the stone men already die?" Delia still asked doubtfully. "No, their souls are on me. You can leave without worry. I will take care of the matters in this area. In the future, you only need to come once a month to get the ore. This is the best of both worlds." Han Shua said to Delia. Delia had originally intended to settle scores with those stone men. But now that she saw that Han Shua had destroyed the stone men's bodies and captured their souls, as well as offered such generous conditions, she did not ask for much and gladly agreed to Han Shua's request. "All right, I'll take them and leave first. I'll wait for you at the cave entrance." Delia didn't ask why Han Shua was staying here. She gave a few instructions to the miners and led them back the way they came. After Delia and the others left, Han Shua followed the instructions of the stone men's souls and crawled into a narrow cave. After walking for about 700 or 800 meters, he suddenly arrived at a huge area. This area was filled with colorful jagged rocks. At a glance, the rock walls above his head were all silver white and even shone with a silver luster. Purple, red, white, and all sorts of rare ores that Han Shua recognized or didn't recognize were nurtured everywhere in this mysterious area. Rich metal elemental energy filled the entire area. In the center, there was a huge rock that looked like an iron pillar that was filled with thick metal elemental energy. The last of the 5 extreme places, the place of metal extreme, finally appeared in front of Han Shua. Chapter 354. The towering stone pillar at the center of the place of extreme metal shone with a faint golden luster. It was also in that area that the energy of metal in the entire place of extreme metal was the densest. Among the 5 places of extreme metal, the place of extreme metal was the most difficult to form. This was because no matter where it was, humans were always tireless in their passion for mining ores. Generally, the surrounding mountains and rivers of the place of extreme metal would be rich in ores. As long as one of the ores was discovered, humans would swarm over like flies, digging to the root of the problem and claiming all the ores as their own. A place of extreme metal could only gradually take shape after hundreds of thousands of years. This process of formation was usually due to the ores being mined and destroyed, making it very difficult for it to form naturally again. The 5 places of extreme metal were all formed by the power of nature due to the uniqueness of the terrain. Even Chu Kanglin, who had cultivated his demonic arts to the 9 changes realm, was unable to use human power to change or repair the 5 places of extreme metal that had been destroyed. The 5 extreme grounds were all formed by nature over millions of years of sedimentation. It was simply not something that could be changed by human power. From the looks of it, this place of extreme metal should have existed for as long as the place of extreme fire for who knows how many years. That towering, golden stone pillar in the center should be the metal attribute treasure that was born from this place of extreme metal. In the world that Han Shuo came from, there was a legend of the indestructible great sage equaling heaven. The great sage equaling heaven, Sun Wukong, was a stone monkey. He obtained the golden cudgel, the sea-stabilizing needle from the Dragon Palace. It was said that it was a metal attribute treasure nurtured by a place of extreme metal that had existed for millions of years. The great sage equaling heaven, who had cultivated from a stone monkey, was a unique existence of the metal attribute. This was why he was able to skillfully utilize the power of the metal attribute treasure in his hands, becoming a powerful and everlasting existence in the world that Han Shuo came from. In the center of this place of extreme metal, there was a towering stone pillar sparkling with faint golden light. It should be the other metal attribute treasure that had been nurtured in this place of extreme metal. As for whether or not this metal attribute treasure had the same miraculous power as the golden cudgel, Han Shuo wasn't sure. However, Han Shuo understood that the metal attribute treasure nurtured by the place of extreme metal could only be grasped by the metal elite zombie that was refined from the place of extreme metal after the metal elite zombie was born, just like the fire elite zombie that was able to collect the fire attribute treasure, the fire lotus. This metal-type treasure existed in the very center of the place of extreme metal. Han Shuo did not dare to rashly move this metal-type treasure, for fear that it would destroy the natural operation of the entire place of extreme metal. Walking to the side of this towering stone pillar, Han Shuo reached out his hand and touched it. His finger made a metallic dang-dang sound as it knocked against the stone pillar. Streams of dense metal elemental energy slowly flowed into Han Shuo's fingertips, causing Han Shuo's body to stiffen. It is indeed a metal attribute treasure. It seems that Metal Elite Zombie is very lucky. Han Shuo exclaimed in admiration. He excitedly circled around the place of extreme metal a few times. Looking at the various rare ores that shone with a faint luster, Han Shuo's heart was filled with joy. However, Han Shuo did not move any of the ores in this place of extreme metal. Before all the materials for refining Metal Elite Zombie were gathered, Han Shuo did not want to act blindly without thinking, lest he change the natural layout of the place of extreme metal and cause irreparable damage. Metal Elite Zombie, oh Metal Elite Zombie, now you're the only one left. Now even a weapon has been nurtured. Han Shuo muttered to himself. He then spread out his right hand and scattered the 8 sparkling souls within the place of extreme metal. He instructed, guard this place well. Not only the miners, if anyone tries to come here, kill them for me. Got it. We won't let anyone destroy this place. The 8 souls replied. Without continuing to stay in the place of extreme metal, Han Shuo was burning with anxiety. He planned to immediately gather the materials needed for Metal Elite Zombie. After Han Shuo left the place of extreme metal, he used the Demon's Lair edge to cut out a few large rocks to block the 3 narrow entrances, leaving only a narrow slit the size of an arm for the 8 souls to enter. After walking out from the belly of Mount Silk, Han Shuo discovered that Delia and the miners were all waiting at the entrance. Among them was Elder Ardman, who was currently in charge of the 5 mines. Has it been taken care of? When Delia saw Han Shuo come out, her eyes lit up and she hastily asked Han Shuo. Grinning brightly, Han Shuo nodded and said, not bad. In the future, not only will the stone men not attack the miners again, they will also collect some or for you every month. Pausing for a moment, Han Shuo said to Delia and Andrew with a solemn expression, but remember, there are a large number of stone men living in those 3 areas. None of you are allowed to trespass into those 3 narrow caves. Otherwise, I won't take responsibility if you die at the hands of the stone men. After hearing Han Shuo's words, Ardman hastily guaranteed, rest assured, my lord. I will definitely discipline them well and won't let them enter those areas. Rest assured, my lord. I don't think they will dare to go in. After all, only my lord can deal with those stone men. How can ordinary miners be a match for those stone men? Delia's bright eyes focused on Han Shuo as she said to Han Shuo with a light smile. After hearing Delia's words, Han Shuo also thought that it was true. The stone men's bodies were sturdy and didn't fear magic. In those narrow spaces, even a senior swordsman would die if he faced the stone men. Although the mountain people of Mount Silk had strong bodies, their strength was far inferior to the stone men. Naturally, they wouldn't be stupid enough to throw away their lives. All right, you guys go there once a month and collect the ores inside. The stone men have already agreed to my request. They are more proficient in mining ore. As long as you don't disturb their lives, they will continue to help you mine ore. Han Shuo replied, "Many thanks, my lord. Many thanks." Ardman was extremely grateful to Han Shuo and bowed to Han Shuo. "Elder, don't be so polite. As the city lord of Brett Hell City, this is what I should do." Han Shuo went over to help Ardman up and said sincerely. Since the crisis of the stone men on Mount Silk had been resolved, Han Shuo didn't continue to stay on Mount Silk. The group that had come to Mount Silk this time had originally been Adelman and some of his subordinates. Now that they'd arrived at Mount Silk, they didn't continue back to Bredel City. Only Han Shuo and Delia were left on the road. The anxious Han Shuo planned to shake Delia off and directly return to Bretel City. However, after thinking for a bit, he felt that it would be impolite to do so. Thus, he slowly walked with her on the rugged mountain road, heading down the mountain. After being caught peeping in the mine, Han Shuo felt guilty when he was alone with Delia and didn't take the initiative to talk to her. However, Delia's gaze towards Han Shuo had a different meaning after she'd exited the mine. Delia, who'd been dressed in a sexy and wild outfit, not only didn't seem restrained at all, she'd even purposefully puffed out her chest. Although Han Shuo wasn't a gentleman, he had been caught alive by Delia the last time he'd peeped on her. This time, the two of them were a bit more well-behaved as they descended the mountain together. In addition, because he was concerned about the metal elite zombie, Han Shuo wasn't as lustful as usual. He didn't stare at Delia's chest along the way. However, the well-behaved Han Shuo was inwardly cursed for being a hypocrite by Delia. As the #1 beauty of the mountain people, Delia's strength was superb among the mountain people for so many years. Her eyes were at the top of her head, but she'd never found a young man she liked among the mountain people. She'd only teased the young men who admired her. Delia, who was 1.7 meters tall, was extremely tall. For ordinary mountain men, height alone was enough for her to be proud of. However, when faced with Han Shuo, who was more than 1.9 meters tall, Delia couldn't feel the slightest bit of arrogance. This time, Han Shuo's thunderous method of blasting the stone man's body into stone fragments had awed her heart that admired the strong. No matter how she looked at it, Han Shuo was a target that she was satisfied with. Suddenly, Delia blocked in front of Han Shuo. Her bright eyes stared fixedly at Han Shuo as she puffed out her soft breasts. Han Shuo, who was walking, was caught off guard and his chest almost directly bumped into Delia's towering breasts. He abruptly stopped and took a step back. Looking at Delia with a puzzled expression, Han Shuo asked, "What's wrong?" "Your lordship, you're a real man. I like you." Contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, Delia stared at Han Shuo with a burning gaze, boldly confessing her true feelings to Han Shuo. Mountain women were originally very forthright, and Delia was one of the best among them. Her wild and fiery nature allowed her to dare to love and hate. She possessed a boldness and straightforwardness that most women in the Lancelot Empire didn't have. Delia's sudden confession surprised Han Shuo. Han Shuo squinted his eyes as he sized up Delia from head to toe, as if he wanted to see her body clearly. As Han Shuo's gaze roamed over her body, Delia instinctively felt a little shy, especially when Han Shuo's gaze fell on her perky twin peaks, as well as some sensitive parts of her waist and abdomen. Her body felt as though it was being directly caressed by Han Shuo's gaze, causing Delia to feel extremely shy. However, Delia wasn't as timid as most women. Having set her sights on Han Shuo as her target, although Delia turned her head away shyly, she didn't choose to retreat. Instead, she puffed out her twin peaks. It seemed that she had sufficient confidence in her figure. "You're not bad." After a while, Han Shua suddenly smiled and said softly. Delia's charming face lit up, revealing a fiery smile. She boldly looked straight at Han Shua and said, "Your lordship, so you want me?" Shaking his head, Han Shua replied, "I'm sorry, I already have a woman, and I like my woman very much." When these words came out, Delia's expression darkened. She lowered her head in silence for a while, and when she raised her head again, she said stubbornly, "I, Delia, have never liked any man. Only your strength can truly make me unable to extricate myself. Regardless of whether you have a woman or not, I will become your woman." Han Shua was speechless. Looking at Delia's stubborn face, as if she didn't know what failure was, he thought to himself that perhaps this woman had been stared at by the mountain men for too long, or perhaps she had set her sights too high. It seemed that she was a little stubborn. Han Shua himself wasn't a gentleman who wouldn't be tempted by a beauty. Otherwise, he wouldn't have two women, Emily and Phoebe, and he wouldn't be so obsessed with Fanny. Of course, Han Shua wasn't the kind of stud horse who would sleep with any woman he saw. As a demonic arts practitioner, Han Shua wouldn't care about worldly restraints. As long as he was truly interested in a woman, he wouldn't care about those moral rules. Delia's figure was extremely alluring, and her looks were indeed not bad. Han Shua didn't deny that he had lust for Delia, but it was only lust. If he could irresponsibly possess Delia, Han Shua would definitely make her his without the slightest hesitation. However, there was a limit to everything. If Delia wholeheartedly wanted to be entangled with him, he would probably abandon her after toying with her in Bretel City. Even the 30,000 mountain people in Bretel City wouldn't be willing to do so. Han Shua himself also didn't want to provoke this kind of trouble that was hard to abandon. "Hee, I do have women, and not just one," Han Shua first explained, then continued, "To be honest, I do have some interest in you. But that kind of interest is only a man's interest in a beautiful woman's body. It's not what you understand. You should understand what I mean if I say it so directly, right?" "What? You have more than one woman?" Contrary to Han Shua's expectations, Delia didn't seem to care too much about the latter part of his words. She only asked about the meaning behind the first part of his sentence in astonishment. Nodding his head, Han Shua's heart stirred. He thought to himself that Delia wouldn't be talking nonsense, right? However, thinking about it again, this matter would be exposed sooner or later, so he didn't deny it. He nodded and replied, "Yes, I indeed have more than one. What about it?" "If you don't mind, I'll be one more. I'd rather be one of the women of someone like you than be the only one in a mediocre man's heart." Delia's eyes actually lit up as she said somewhat excitedly, "I just knew that a man like you would definitely have more than one woman. Then adding me shouldn't be a problem, right?" Han Shua was a bit dumbfounded when he heard Delia's words. He thought to himself that mountain women were indeed a bit more forthright and uninhibited than he'd expected. Delia's attitude towards these matters was a bit too much for someone like Han Shua, who'd always done as he pleased. Seeing that Delia wanted to discuss this matter in detail with him, Han Shua, on one hand, was concerned about the metal elite zombies' refining materials, and on the other hand, didn't know how to answer Delia. He directly said, "We'll talk about this matter in the future. I'm not interested in you at the moment. When I'm interested in you, I'll consider your proposal. All right, I still have some matters to attend to, so I'll be taking my leave first." As soon as he finished speaking, Han Shua soared into the sky in front of Delia. He circulated his demonic yuan and revealed his disdainful aura. He turned into a streak of black light and disappeared into the clouds. Delia looked at Han Shua's gradually disappearing figure in the sky with infatuation. Her charming face was resolute as she fiercely nodded, muttering to herself, "I'll definitely make you fall in love with me. City Lord, hee. Only a man like you can make me wholeheartedly submit to you." Han Shua naturally didn't know what Delia said after that. Han Shua flew all the way back to Bretel City and directly found little Fatty Jack. He made a list of materials for refining the metal elite zombie and handed it to Jack, saying, "Buy these materials for me. It doesn't matter if you use the Buzzed Merchant Guild or any other merchant guild. In short, get me the materials listed as soon as possible." "No problem, Jack. who had an enormous amount of gold coins in his hands, spoke with great confidence. He had an extraordinary bearing of, "Leave it to me." After he finished speaking, Jack said, "Oh, right, Dick was looking for you." When he heard that Dick was looking for him, Han Shua left Jack's place and headed towards the Dark Mantle stronghold in Bretel City. Under normal circumstances, Dick would be there. When he arrived at the Dark Mantle's secret stronghold in Bretel City, Han Shua found Dick as expected. He saw that Dick was currently in the Dark Mantle stronghold, handling some information regarding the 7 Grand Duchies that his subordinates had reported to him. Seeing Han Shua suddenly enter, Dick hastily stood up in surprise and saluted to Han Shua. He then had Han Shua sit down and asked with a smile, "My lord, why have you come? I heard from Jack that you were looking for me. Did something happen?" Han Shua asked Dick after sitting down. There were only 6 people in this Dark Mantle stronghold, including Dick. However, Han Shua knew that there were definitely more than 6 Dark Mantle members in Bretel City. It was just that these people were usually scattered around Bretel City or the 7 Grand Duchies. They were usually spying on the secrets of various parties or carrying out secret missions. These people wouldn't come here unless there were special circumstances. They would only report to Dick when they obtained accurate information or completed a mission successfully. Dick originally didn't have enough manpower on his side, but after Han Shua's arrival, Candide had arranged for some members to enter Bretel City and directly serve under Han Shua. All of the secret activities of the Lancelot Empire were under Candide's sole responsibility. Although Bretel City was located in the easternmost region of the empire, it was still under Candide's control. As the most popular person at Candide's side and the current city lord of Bretel City, Han Shua had the right to control all of the Dark Mantle's personnel changes in Bretel City. Dick was naturally under Han Shua's jurisdiction. "My lord, I went to the city lord's mansion to report to you because I just received some news. It's just that you weren't at the city lord's mansion at that time. I didn't think that my lord would take the initiative to come over. This lowly one is truly overwhelmed by the favor." Dick also sat down with a smile before explaining to Han Shua. All right, cut the crap. What's going on?" In private, Han Shua and Dick never put on the airs of a city lord and asked. Dick chuckled softly, then coughed lightly and said sternly, "I reckon we're in big trouble this time. The 7 dukedoms have all stopped fighting. According to the information our people have sent over, the dukes of the 7 dukedoms have secretly met in a valley. Our people have no way of knowing the contents of the meeting, but thinking about it, it's obvious that they're trying to deal with us. When the 7 dukedoms weren't under the threat of Bretel City, they'd fought tirelessly against each other. However, Bretel City was currently displaying an overbearing, ferocious aura. For the 7 Grand Dukedoms, Bretel City had become an important threat. The 7 Grand Dukedoms were originally split from the Verdun Imperial Dynasty. Due to the riots between the princes 100 years ago, the Verdun Imperial Dynasty had been split into 7 dukedoms, gradually becoming the 7 Grand Dukedoms of today. When there were no foreign enemies, they were happy to invade other dukedoms to obtain more benefits. However, the 7 Grand Dukedoms were still considered one family. Once a common enemy appeared, the 7 Grand Dukedoms would once again tightly band together. Last time, the Lancelot Empire hadn't understood the situation and rashly invaded the 7 Grand Dukedoms. In the end, the 7 Grand Dukedoms were quickly repelled by the joint army of the 7 Grand Dukedoms. It was also from that time that Bretel City was unable to recover, becoming a useless existence. It looks like the 7 Grand Dukedoms now view Bretel City as a new threat. Hee, we should be proud. Bretel City, which doesn't even have 100,000 citizens, is far inferior to any one of the 7 Grand Dukedoms. I didn't expect them to think so highly of us. Han Shua said to Dick with a cold smile. My lord, we absolutely cannot lower our guard against the 7 Grand Dukedoms. They are different from ordinary bandit groups. They are a true army. Not only do they have a complete set of siege equipment, but the quality of the soldiers of the 7 Grand Dukedoms is also very high. They might even be a cut above the average army of the Lancelot Empire. Dick smiled wryly as he explained to Han Shua. In addition, each dukedom has at least 30 to 40,000 standing armies, not to mention the private armies of the local nobles. You can calculate how many soldiers there are in total. If the 7 Grand Dukedom's allied army really arrives at Bretel City, I'm afraid their military strength will be 1 or 2 times more than our population. We absolutely cannot lower our guard. Don't worry, I already have a plan for this matter. I will make sure their allied army can't unite. Han Shua laughed sinisterly as he said to Dick. Chapter 355. Sakamamir Valley was located in the center of the 7 Grand Duchies. The 7 Grand Duchies would secretly meet here. Although the 7 Grand Duchies had the intention of joining forces to deal with Bretel City, none of the dukes dared to visit the other duchies due to their mutual suspicions. Therefore, the 7 Grand Dukes gathered their armies at Sakamamir Valley. The majority of the troops were temporarily stationed in the plains outside the valley. The 7 Grand Dukes gathered in the valley with their elite experts. Tanai, Mount Sakamamir, was covered in flowers and ancient trees. Under the warm sunlight, a simple tent was set up in the middle of the valley, next to a small stream. Within the spacious tent, the 7 Grand Dukes were secretly discussing something with their experts. The tent was densely guarded by knights. The tent was covered in layers of magical boundaries. With the 7 Grand Dukes gathered in the tent, any mishap would be a fatal blow to the 7 Grand Duchies. The 7 Grand Dukes were debating endlessly inside the tent. The main points of their argument were about the command of the Allied forces and their battle strategy, including the distribution of the spoils of war. The 7 Grand Dukes had been locked in a fierce battle before this. Even though they had gathered here for the sake of Bretel City, the anger on the battlefield had yet to subside. Naturally, the dukes who were originally enemies didn't have any good expressions on their faces. Helentina of Helen Duchy had been in an extremely irritable mood recently. She was no longer as glamorous as before, and had obviously become more haggard. The news that she'd been raped by Han Shua had inadvertently spread throughout the 7 Grand Duchies. This caused Helentina to become the target of ridicule overnight. Everyone looked at her with strange gazes, making her feel extremely uncomfortable. The Grand Duke of Narsen Duchy, Benedict Sackville, who used to be her staunch ally, had stopped communicating with her ever since he heard the news. Now that they had truly met in this place, Benedict Sackville only greeted her politely and didn't have his previous attentiveness. Helentina understood where the problem lay. However, she had indeed been captured alive by Han Shua and brought to Bretel City. She'd even been locked up for several days. This fact made it impossible for her to explain herself. The haughty Helentina had been tormented by strange gazes during this period of time. Even some citizens of the Hellen Empire felt that the impure Helentina was no longer suitable for the position of Grand Duchess. If it wasn't for Helentina's ruthless methods of killing several rebellious nobles in succession, it was likely that she wouldn't have been able to maintain her position in the Hellen Duchy. Now that they had arrived at the meeting point between the 7 duchies, Helentina had once again become the object of neglect. At this moment, Benedict Sackville was quarreling with Bavenden Duchy's Alec Ambridge. The topic of their quarrel was actually the distribution of the spoils of war. Alec Ambridge had his eyes set on the 6 magic crystal cannons worth 600,000 gold coins in Bretel City. He was determined to obtain them. These 6 magic crystal cannons had originally been purchased by Benedict Sackville from the distant Brute Merchant Alliance for Helentina through his own channels. Benedict Sackville had taken it for granted that these 6 magic crystal cannons should belong to him. He didn't back down in the slightest as he argued with Alec Ambridge. All of a sudden, Helentina, the person who'd paid 600,000 gold coins to purchase the 6 magic crystal cannons from the Brute Merchant Alliance, had been forgotten. Benedict Sackville, the modest gentleman who'd previously disregarded everything to pursue her, had now become the one who directly plundered her interests. Helentina coldly watched the dispute between the 6 Grand Dukes, feeling increasingly irritated in her heart. Unconsciously, Helentina actually thought of Han Shua. She'd deeply experienced Han Shua's ruthlessness. She didn't know why, but Helentina faintly felt that these 6 men who were endlessly arguing in front of her didn't seem like real men. On the contrary, the image of Bretel City's lord, whose eyes were filled with a fiendish and ruthless rage, had appeared in her mind from time to time. She always felt that the 6 Grand Dukes in front of her were no match for the ruthless city lord of Bretel City. Bretel City's population didn't even reach 100,000. Not to mention the other 6 duchies. Even Helen Duchy's military strength was more than enough to compete with Bretel City. Now that the allied forces of the 7 Grand Duchies were planning to march into Bretel City, Helentina actually had the laughable thought that the allied forces would fail. Even she herself felt that this was a bit absurd. Duke Helen, what do you want from Bretel City? Randy Allard, the Grand Duke of the Bonton Duchy, leaned against Helentina and looked at the silent statue-like Helentina as he asked politely. Helentina was roused from her contemplation. She calmed her heart and thought for a while before saying softly, I only want the life of the city lord of Bretel City. However, I don't know why, but I feel that it won't be so easy for us to win. Haha, Grand Duke Helen, you must be too tired recently. With the allied forces of our 7 Grand Duchies, we easily routed the Lancelot Empire's army that had been soaring to the heavens. You want to stop our advance with just that shabby Bretel City? That's just too laughable. I think that Grand Duke Helen's courage must have been broken after being captured by that city lord, right? Alec Ambridge suddenly butted in after hearing the conversation. He didn't hide his contempt for Helentina at all as he laughed and ridiculed her. At this moment, Benedict Sackville, who was supposed to speak up for Helentina, had just been arguing with Alec Ambridge until his face was flushed with anger. But now, he suddenly turned silent and slowly nodded his head, as if agreeing with the argument of someone who had just been an enemy. Helentina only felt a chill in her heart. She looked at the man in front of her who had once said that he would take care of her for the rest of his life. She suddenly had the urge to laugh. I'm a bit tired. You guys continue your discussion. Helentina stood up wearily and said a few words to the 6 Grand Dukes. She then walked out alone. None of the 6 Grand Dukes tried to keep Helentina. After she left, Alec Ambridge said in a disdainful tone, It looks like this woman has been conquered by the new city lord's skills in bed. She can't even see the situation clearly. Heh, I really don't understand why such a fool wouldn't let go of such a woman in the first place. Who are you talking about? Benedict Sackville flew into a rage. To Benedict Sackville, the matter of him crazily chasing after Helentina had already become the greatest humiliation of his life. If anyone offended him in this regard, he would relentlessly pursue the matter. Heh, it's nothing. Seeing Benedict Sackville fly into a rage, Alec Ambridge, who hadn't been able to suppress him regarding the ownership of the magic crystal cannons, suddenly felt a lot more carefree in his heart. On the plains outside the valley, Helentina returned with a gloomy face inside a tent where the Helen Duchy's army was stationed. Her heart gradually sank to the bottom of the valley. Helen, why are you unhappy again? The super-rank magical beast called Fire Phoenix had transformed into a beautiful woman dressed in red. She poured a cup of tea for Helentina in the tent and handed it to her. Sister Firewind, is a woman's body really that important? Why is it that after I returned from Bretel City, it seems like everyone is making life difficult for me? Helentina sighed softly and asked Firewind, Helen, why would you say that? That Brian didn't do anything to you. He only extorted 1,000,000 gold coins from you. Firewind looked at Helentina in astonishment and asked in puzzlement. Putting down the cup of tea that Firewind had given her, Helentina sighed again and said in annoyance, But everyone thinks that it happened. I have no way of explaining it. Who cares about those mediocre people? It's fine as long as you know in your heart that it didn't happen. Why bother so much? Firewind continued to persuade Helentina. It's just that that person is too strong. Otherwise, I would have helped you kill him long ago. Please don't. He's not someone we can handle. Otherwise, I wouldn't have allied with the 7 duchies. Helentina was startled and hastily persuaded Firewind not to be impulsive. She then shook her head and smiled bitterly. Sometimes I think that maybe I really was raped by that person. Maybe he would take care of me. Unfortunately, I know that's impossible. How can you think like that? He is your greatest enemy. Not only did you extort 1,000,000 gold coins from him, but you also released such a sinister message. We must kill him, otherwise it will be difficult to wash away your innocence. Flame Phoenix said hatefully, "How can you think like that?" Sighing once again, Helentina helplessly said, "Even if I kill him, I won't be able to clear my name. Not only is this Bretel City Lord sinister enough, his strength is also extraordinarily terrifying. I don't know why, but I always feel like he's beside me. It seems that my mind is really a bit muddled." Looking at Helentina's fretful and worried face, Firewind also sighed in her heart. She really didn't know how to comfort her. Ever since returning from Bretel City, Helentina had always faced the doubts and mockery of everyone. Originally, Helentina was a goddess-like existence in Helen Duchy, but now she'd become the subject of discussion among the citizens. Having been suddenly thrown down from her high position as a goddess, Helentina simply couldn't adapt to this kind of change. The smile on her face became fewer and fewer, and her entire being was tormented by worry to the point where she couldn't bear it. It's all that Brian's fault. I must help Helen kill him, Firewind thought to herself. On a mound 5,000 meters away from Helentina's tent, Han Shuo clearly heard the conversation in Helentina's tent through a Een demon. This woman still owes me 600,000 gold coins. Looking at the days, it's about time she pays me back. Han Shuo muttered to himself. He turned his head and glanced in Helentina's direction, then snuck towards Sakamamir Valley. A Een demon gradually returned from Helentina's tent and headed towards Sakamamir Valley with Han Shuo. When they were about to reach the central tent, Han Shuo hid himself deep in the ground that the Earth Elite Zombie had opened up. He only used the Een demon to spy on the tent in the center of the area. The Grand Dukes of the 6 Grand Duchies were all inside. They'd spared no effort in setting up the security of the tent. All kinds of magical boundaries had been set up densely. Han Shuo used the Een demon to spy on the area for a long time, but discovered that he couldn't approach the area without making a sound. It looks like I'll have to wait for them to leave. These fellows' defenses are really tight. There are enough boundaries in the sky and on the ground, and there's the army of the 7 Grand Duchies stationed around. Even the undead army can't destroy them. They're really a bunch of cowards, Han Shuo thought inwardly. He used the Een demon to spy on the area, but he himself remained deep underground and didn't move an inch. After about an hour and a half, the 6 dukes walked out of the tent one after another. All of them had dissatisfied expressions on their faces. It looked like the discussion this time hadn't come to a conclusion. The operation to deal with Bretel City would be delayed for another day or two. They would only be able to proceed after they'd arranged everything properly. The 6 dukes were all protected by experts. They'd brought the experts of their respective duchies here for fear of being ambushed. Every duke was protected by an expert with a powerful aura. In fact, these dukes would indeed take advantage of the opportunity to harm others. This kind of situation had happened from time to time when the 7 Grand Duchies had held some sort of conference in the past. It was precisely because of this that they'd been so careful. Han Shuo hid deep underground, not in a hurry to make a move on anyone. He waited until they'd all left the valley. Only when night had fallen did he slowly move in a certain direction. That area was where Duke Alec Ambridge's army of Bavenden Duchy was stationed. In the dead of night, it was the most appropriate time for some dishonorable things to be carried out. Duke Alec Ambridge did not forget to indulge in the meeting here. In a luxurious tent in the center of the hall, Duke Alec Ambridge pressed a tall female knight on the table, and from behind, he conquered this female knight who was wearing a formal knight's armor. Only her buttocks were exposed, and it was perked up high. The female knight lay on the table, panting and moaning softly. She swayed her plump buttocks, coordinating with Grand Duke Alec Ambridge's subduing movements. Her fine black hair spread out to cover her face. There were actually 2 sinister-looking men in Alec Ambridge's tent. The 2 men turned a blind eye to Alec Ambridge's debauchery, indifferently gripping the long swords in their hands as they vigilantly guarded their surroundings. They were both at the level of great swordmaster. Alec Ambridge let out a loud cheer. When the pleasure spread from his lower abdomen to his entire body, he suddenly felt the ground beneath his feet shake to a greater extent. However, Alec Ambridge didn't pay too much attention to the changes in the soles of his feet due to the brief dizziness he felt when a piercing pain came from the soles of his feet. Only then did Alec Ambridge shout in alarm. He grabbed the female knight that was still pressed down by him and dragged her towards the soles of his feet. Puff! The sharp weapon pierced through the body of the female knight who had just recovered from her orgasm. Her mithril armor, which was known for its sturdiness, was penetrated along with her body. The sharp edge of the weapon continued to stab upwards without diminishing its might. Alec Ambridge, who was scared out of his wits, felt a chill in his chest. Ignoring the tearing pain in his left foot, he limped towards the outside of the tent and shouted, "Assassin! There's an assassin!" The two sinister-looking great swordmasters in the tent had already rushed over the moment he had used the female knight as a meat shield. Two dazzling silver rays of light fell unceremoniously on the female knight who hadn't completely died yet. The silver sword rays instantly tore the female knight apart. The two rudely tossed the body of the female knight, which was riddled with holes, to the side, and cautiously looked at the dark hole below. This hole was only the size of a person's arm. It seemed that the attack had come from that arm-sized hole. Damn it! Wasn't there a rock barrier underground? How could someone still be able to attack me? Alec Ambridge's left foot was badly mangled. He furrowed his brows and said, "Fortunately, I reacted in time. Otherwise, I would have died here today. That damned earth mage dared to slack off. I'm going to kill him. Your Grace, the rock barrier underground is still there. It's just that the strength of the enemy is too strong." The power of his weapon had exceeded the endurance of the rock barrier. This person is definitely not an ordinary expert. Fortunately, Your Grace is fine. I wonder who it is that wants Your Grace's life? One of the sinister-looking great swordmasters said with a gloomy face. Who else could it be? It must be that damned Benedict Sackville. I only mocked him a bit today, but he actually sent people to attack me in the middle of the night. This guy really deserves to die. Alec Ambridge shouted with a gloomy face. He then shouted towards the outside of the tent, "Priest, damned priest, hurry up and come over. One of my legs is about to be crippled. I've spent so many gold coins on you guys. Why can't you hurry up at the most crucial moment?" While Alec Ambridge was shouting and yelling, Han Shuo, who'd missed his first strike, quietly left. Even the tunnel formed by the Earth Elite zombie was blocked once again. Han Shuo had tried to directly kill Alec Ambridge, but he hadn't expected that this person would be so merciless. At the most crucial moment, he'd actually used the female knight he'd just had fun with to block a fatal blow. Fortunately, Han Shuo had heard Alec Ambridge's suspicions and jealousy towards Benedict Sackville through the Een demons as he left. Han Shuo felt that his goal had been achieved, so he didn't recklessly attack again. Chapter 356. Every one of the 7 Grand Dukes was especially careful about their own safety. In the Sycamore region, they were even more careful in protecting themselves. After leaving Alec Ambridge's place, Han Shuo made a trip to Grand Duke Niam Beige of Bisley Duchy. Han Shuo planned to make a move against Niam Beige, but before Han Shuo could approach, he sensed a divine aura coming from Niam Beige's tent. Han Shuo was incomparably familiar with this kind of divine aura. He immediately understood that someone from the Church of Light was definitely inside. From the strength of this divine aura, Han Shuo knew that the person inside wasn't weak. It was most likely to be Kas of the Church of Light. Instead of making a move against Niam Beige, Han Shuo had been hiding in the depths of the ground, only using an Een demon to spy on the area from afar. When dawn was about to break, Han Shuo discovered through the Een demon that Kas and his party had quietly left the tent. Niam Beige himself was a Sky Knight. Among the 7 Grand Duchies, his Bisley Duchy had many temples of light of the Church of Light. He guided the citizens to believe in the God of Light and offered their pious faith to the God of Light. Now that Han Shuo saw through the Een demon that Niam Beige and Kas were close, and thought of the friendly attitude Bisley Duchy had towards the Church of Light, he faintly felt that this Niam Beige himself might be a follower of the Church of Light. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spared no effort to help the Church of Light. After Kos left, there were still light magic fluctuations in Neum Beige's tent. Apart from that, there were also two faint powerful auras. Seeing that the sky was already bright, Neum Beige continued to discuss with his subordinates after Kos left. It seemed that he had no intention of sleeping. Han Shuo pondered for a moment and gave up on the idea of attacking Neum Beige. On this day, the 7 Grand Duchies were discussing the matter of sending troops to Bretel City in the Sycamore Valley. Alec Ambridge, who had been attacked earlier, dragged his left leg that was covered in bandages. He loudly cursed Benedict Sackville the moment he came over, accusing Benedict Sackville of sending people to despicably attack him last night. Benedict Sackville felt greatly wronged when he was ridiculed by Alec Ambridge yesterday, so he had a belly full of anger. Inside the tent, the two of them didn't give in and almost got into a scuffle. If the other Grand Dukes hadn't stepped in to stop them, the two of them would have fought endlessly. Even after the two of them were separated, their anger hadn't dissipated. Their eyes shone with an ominous glint as they thought of some sinister plan to deal with each other. In addition, Grand Duke Bert Zeely of the Ballet Duchy was very dissatisfied with the distribution of profits. He insisted on seizing the 5 surrounding mines after attacking Bretel City. Due to Bert Zeely's insistence, the Duke, who was also interested in the mine, was naturally unwilling. In the end, the day's discussion ended in discord. If this goes on, the 7 Grand Duchies will start fighting again before the war against Bretel City has even begun. I don't think these people would join forces so quickly unless they're facing imminent death. Last time, it was also because the Lancelot Empire's army had attacked right at their doorstep that they quickly joined forces. It looks like they don't care about the threat of Bretel City at all. These people only know how to quarrel all day long. What great things can they accomplish? Helentina complained of Firewind with a frown after returning to her tent. Let them quarrel. When the day comes that Bretel City really attacks, they'll know fear. Firewind and Helentina had also participated in the discussion inside the tent. They could clearly see the faces of the 7 Grand Dukes inside. Although Firewind didn't have the right to open the door and speak, she still despised the 6 fellows who only cared about fame and profit. Your Grace, Grand Duke Bert Zeely of the Ballet Duchy requests an audience. While Helentina and Firewind were muttering resentfully, a guard's voice came from outside the door. What is that guy doing here? The smell on his body makes me feel very uncomfortable. Firewind frowned at Helentina after hearing the guard's report. Ask him to come in. Helentina instructed the guard outside, then said to Firewind, this person has always been a sworn enemy of the Bustling Duchy. The proposal to form an alliance against Bretel City this time was made by Neum Beige of the Bustling Duchy. I think this Bert Zeely seems to have the intention of destroying the stability of the alliance. I don't know why he's looking for me. While Helentina and Firewind were talking, Grand Duke Bert Zeely of the Ballet Duchy walked in with a faint smile. Bert Zeely was an old summoner. However, it was rumored that he had signed a contract with the evil god. His summoning magic often summoned monsters from hell. Bert Zeely's entire body gave off a faint, eerie feeling that made people tremble in fear. Even if he had a kind smile on his face, people would still feel that his smile was sinister and sinister. Firewind was a wholly super-rank magical beast. She hated the smell on Bert Zeely's body very much. After seeing Bert Zeely come in, Firewind instinctively distanced herself from him. Grand Duke Bert, what business do you have with me? Helentina and Bert Zeely's Ballet Duchy didn't have any real conflicts due to the distance between them. However, Helentina had always disliked this sinister and evil Grand Duke. On top of that, she hadn't been in a good mood recently, so she naturally didn't have a good expression on her face. Heh, I've come this time to discuss matters regarding Bretel City with Grand Duke Helen. After the Calamity Church's necromancer wolf had been rejuvenated by Han Shua's skeletal staff, he had turned into a handsome and elegant youth. His skin was even fairer than a woman's, and the sharp claws that had been formed from old fey demons had long since disappeared, replaced by a pair of slender and beautiful hands. Slowly sitting up on the large sea mink fur bed, Wolf chuckled and said, old friend, that Brian's strength is beyond your imagination. He also has the skeletal staff in his hands. The higher-ups have already given the order to not let anything happen to him no matter what. All we need to do is to support him as much as possible. Bert Zeely furrowed his brows and said to Wolf, "Could it be that the Pope values him so much just because he's the master of the skeletal staff? We might as well seize his skeletal staff and let you absorb all of his memories. Wouldn't that be more convenient and less troublesome?" Shaking his head, the necromancer Grand Magus Wolf, who had lived for who knew how many years, smiled and explained, "It's not that easy. Koss personally led 300 Templars, but still couldn't take him down. Both times, they were seriously injured and forced to retreat. Do you think we can easily capture him? Besides, he's already an Archmage necromancer. Oh no, I think his mental strength shouldn't be at the Archmage realm. The skeletal staff is related to the secrets of the Holy Land. What we need to do is to absorb him into the church at all costs. In addition, we can build a good relationship with him. I can guarantee that this will be very beneficial to us." "All right then. All these years, your decisions have always been correct. I will act according to the plan. I just hope that he won't disappoint us," Bert Zeely replied. While Bert Zeely was conversing with Archmagus Necromancer Wolf inside the tent, Han Shua, who had followed behind Ian Demon, could clearly sense the evil aura emanating from Wolf inside the tent. Bert Zeely's Bullet Duchy and Neum Beige's Bustling Duchy, who believed in the god of light, had been fighting fiercely for so many years. They had never reconciled. Originally, Han Shua didn't know what was going on. Now that he sensed Wolf's aura inside the tent, he immediately understood. It seemed that Grand Duke Neum Beige of Bustling Duchy was a member of the Church of Light, while Grand Duke Bert Zeely of Bullet Duchy was a member of the Calamity Church. The two most powerful churches on the continent had been fighting openly and covertly for so many years. It seemed that it wasn't just a small-scale battle. So it turned out that they were secretly controlling the war between duchies. Wolf had previously obtained his youthful appearance from the power of the skeletal staff. From their previous conversation, Han Shua understood that Wolf seemed to care a lot about him. He was actually willing to protect Han Shua at all costs. Each and every one of them was furious. Among them, Benedict Sackville's heart was as clear as snow. He was already certain that Alec Ambridge of Bavenden Duchy had made a move against him last night. Alec Ambridge also believed that the death of his generals was related to Benedict. This time, the two of them didn't start a fight in Sycamore Valley without a care for their manners. Instead, both of them had gloomy faces as they silently stared at each other with hatred, constantly thinking of ways to retaliate. The other two grand duchies that had been ambushed were also filled with righteous indignation. They targeted their former enemies. Helen, Bullet, and Bustling duchies, which had been safe and sound last night, were the first to be suspected. The originally unstable alliance had long since changed in the dark. During the day, the 7 grand duchies would get to the bottom of this matter and investigate who was responsible for it. At night, they would each send out assassins to roam about, fighting to the death. For 3 days in a row, Han Shua didn't continue to make a move. The 7 grand duchies' grudges, old and new, surged up together. Some masked men in black robes roamed about everywhere. Strange shadows often flashed on the ground and in the sky. From time to time, mournful screams could be heard from the area where the 7 grand duchies were stationed. This meant that someone had been secretly killed. Han Shua had originally planned to take advantage of this opportunity to make a move, but he suddenly discovered that he simply didn't have the opportunity to do so. This was because there were too many men in black robes roaming about at night. Han Shua didn't even have enough demon to deal with them. He didn't know which duchy these people had come from. In any case, the situation was gradually becoming chaotic. The 7 grand dukes are indeed a bunch of rabid dogs. Han Shua couldn't help but sigh as he couldn't get involved. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.